सर फैकल्टी सब ज्वाइन करने वाले हैं 1-2 मिनट में.
Okay, sir. Sure. We are just waiting for him. As soon as he joins, we will start the session.
ओके ओके सर.
Thank you.
बस दोनों ऑन क्या है.
Very good morning to each and everyone present here. Welcome to the Spark International Online Conference on Emerging Trends in Healthcare Technology in the Post-COVID-19 era, and welcome to this ceremony. As per Indian tradition, at first we will start the opening ceremony by lighting the lamp and the Saraswati Vandana. Before that, let me introduce my guests. We have with us Sri Amit Khareji, Secretary, Ministry of Human Resource Development. We have Professor Virendra Kumar Tewari, Director, IIT Kharagpur. Professor Siman Kumar Bhattacharya, Deputy Director, IIT Kharagpur. Professor B.N. Singh, Registrar, IIT Kharagpur. My esteemed colleagues from my institutes and from other institutes. I request Sri Amit Khareji to lighting the lamp, first lamp. Please. Now I request Professor B.K. Tewari, Director IIT Kharagpur, to light the lamp. I request Professor Siman Kumar Bhattacharya, Deputy Director, to light the lamp. I request Professor B.N. Singh, Registrar IIT Kharagpur, to light the other lamp.
या ब्रह्माच्युत शङ्कर प्रभृतिभिः निःशेषजाड्यापहा शुक्लां ब्रह्मविचारसारपरमाम् आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं वीणापुस्तकधारिणीम् अभयदाम् जाड्यान्धकारापहाम् हस्ते स्फाटिकमालिकां विदधतीं पद्मासने संस्थितां वन्दे तां परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम्
Now I request Professor Rintu Banerjee, Professor Agricultural and Food Engineering, to welcome our guests.
Honorable Mr. Amit Khare, Secretary, MHRD, Professor V.K. Tiwari, Director, IIT Kharagpur, Professor S.K. Bhattacharya, Deputy Director, Professor B.N. Singh, Register, the Galaxy of Deans, IIT Kharagpur, Professor Adrijit Goswami, Professor Murthy, and each and every member of SPARK team, Professor Jyotinmoy Chatterjee, Head SMST, invited speakers of the conference, faculty members of IIT Kharagpur, participants and other dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all of you to this conference. At the outset, let me extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you for conceptualizing and accepting the proposal put forth to SPARK team for conducting the international online conference on emerging trend in healthcare technology in post-COVID-19 era, which is going to be held from today and tomorrow, that is 8th and 9th August 2020, along with School of Medical Science and Technology, IIT Kharagpur. After the emergence of COVID-19 crisis, the essentiality of generating awareness and conducting in-depth research to prevent the life-threatening disease and pandemic has been realized profoundly. Since last year ending and in India from March 2020, our lifestyle has completely got changed due to this COVID-19 pandemic, which has a serious impact on people's health, livelihood, economics, and behavior, including our relationship with the nature. The structure of more enlightened process is a strategic triangle where coronavirus infection, revival of global economy, and re-engineering of social behavior can brought under a single umbrella through global coordination. This conference will cover critical aspects such as medical imaging based diagnostic technique, development of modern computational and analytical techniques for treatment purposes following data-based approach, and clinical decision support based on artificial intelligence and machine learning. This exchange of ideas is expected to bring forth the latest development in the field as well as serve as a platform for generating and promoting novel ideas for diagnostic tool for early detection and better therapeutic intervention. Distinguished international and national experts from the area of healthcare technology have kindly agreed to address this conference. On my own behalf and on behalf of the entire Spark team, IIT Kharagpur, we welcome you all for this international online conference. Hope my beloved students, participants will enjoy the lecture for the coming 2 days. The expert scientist and researcher will discuss every aspect of post-COVID-19 well-being for a healthy and enjoyable future. We welcome you all to this conference. Thank you all for your patiently hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. As the coordinating institute of Spark, as entrusted by MHRD, IIT Kharagpur has to conduct 2 international conferences. This is the first one of the series, of this particular series. One of the basic mandate of the Spark is that a collaborative interaction among faculty members, research scholars, UG/PG students of both Indian institutes as well as the international institutes from 26 countries. And this is very evident from the participation list. We have actually 1457 registered participants. Out of that, around 625 are the faculty members from nationally and internationally. We have around 600 research scholars who has joined this, and also we have the undergraduate and postgraduate students are 533, which is really encouraging. We have given the web links to a portion of these participants. For others, we are live streaming on YouTube and Facebook. So I hope everyone can use this thing. We have the international participants and the speakers from USA, UK, Netherlands, Austria, Sweden, South Africa, and of course from India. Now I request our Deputy Director, Professor Siman Kumar Bhattacharya, to say few words about the conference.
A very good morning or good evening, as the case may be. Sri Amit Khariji, the Secretary, Ministry of Education, Government of India, the chief guest of today's program. Professor V.K. Tiwari, Director, IIT Kharagpur. My colleagues from IIT Kharagpur, distinguished speakers from all over the world, and the participants on this program. On behalf of IIT Kharagpur, I extend a very hearty welcome to you all to this particular conference, which is being organized under the banner of a program called Scheme for Promotion of Academic and Research Collaborations, or in short SPARC. SPARC is an activity which is a flagship program of Ministry of Education, which has been launched with active participation of IIT Kharagpur, has gained tremendous popularity in the world. We have a large number of projects which are being operated through this particular program. As Professor Goswami said, that our mandate is to have 2 conferences in a year under this particular program, and this particular program is one of those in this series. And as you all perhaps will realize, that under this particular situation that the whole world is going through, the pandemic, the COVID-19, has given us tremendous opportunity as well as we are going through the difficulties. And I think the scientific community of the world is engaged on various activities to probe into that how do you combat this pandemic in an effective manner. I think the topic of this conference, the emerging trends in healthcare technology in post-COVID-19 era, is very pertinent, and I thank the SPARK committee of this institute who are organizing this conference. Well, IIT Kharagpur, which is the first in the series of IITs in the country, started its journey in 1951, and this year, in fact, we are going to celebrate the 70th Foundation Day on 18th August 2020. So over a period of these 70 years, IIT Kharagpur had a tremendous journey and has come to this state by building strength to strength. The institute, which started for focusing on the aspects of technology, had added in its fold the education on management, the education on law, and more uniquely education on medical technology as well. Apart from some unique departments the institute has, such as the agriculture and food engineering, the naval architecture, cryogenic engineering, and so on, we have large potential of this institute. As I said, that one of our unique school is School of Medical Science and Technology, where the doctors from different parts of the country do come to understand, to acquire knowledge in the area of technology. And in a short time, IIT Kharagpur in fact is planning to get into the medical education as well. While IIT Kharagpur is focusing on the research activities in different pertinent areas, such as the advanced transportation systems, advanced manufacturing systems, we are also not shying away from looking into the activities such as food security or the affordable healthcare, which is the need of the country. So under this context, I would say that the topic on which the whole world is going to discuss, which is emerging trends in healthcare technology in post-COVID era, is absolutely pertinent, and I am thankful to all the participants who have come forward to take part in this particular conference. In fact, at IIT Kharagpur, we are working on the concept. We are saying that, well, the people do visit hospital, but why can't the hospital visit to the people? So possibly that's the kind of challenges that we need to take, and we need to come up with the technological inventions, interventions, and so on, so that we can deliver to the country the appropriate tool, so that we can combat all kinds of pandemics. I once again welcome you all and thank you to participate in this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for giving an idea about IIT Kharagpur to outside participants. Now, as a coordinating institute of SPARK, in phase 1, you may be knowing, we received 1187 proposals. Out of that, around 394 proposals were approved, and the approved value amount was approximately 251 crores. Under the able leadership of our director, Professor V.K. Tewari, we can say that already for these proposals, before the post-COVID era, around 100 courses were conducted by international faculties and our faculties. Around 50 focused workshops has already been conducted. Around 76 journal papers has been published already under this SPARK scheme, and few patents have already been filed over here. So we are expecting more collaborative work which will help the Indian society. Now I request our director, Professor V.K. Tewari, to address the audience. Sir, please.
Good morning to all of you. My namaskar to Adarni Amit Kharji. In fact, we are very grateful to you that the very first time when I talked to you about this particular Spark program, you agreed. We know that you are very busy and your every minute is very important. Even then, you agreed for this, and this morning you are there with us. We are really very grateful to you because your presence will definitely encourage all of us in going ahead with the program which is called as a Spark. That means Scheme for Promotion of Academic and Research Collaborations with the world. In fact, we know that the MHRD is very much behind all the all the institutes, and in fact trying to see that we figure in the top 100 or top 50 in the world. And that is why several schemes the government of India is coming up, so that we take up the help of these schemes and then go ahead. In fact, the idea behind this is that we will have an exchange of information, particularly with regard to all the aspects of technology, and technology in the sense that we would be talking of various aspects in different which are there in different countries in the world. We know that this particular program which has been started has come at the backdrop of a very unseen situation which we are facing for last 6-8 months. Well, the program has been rightly and very, in fact, very just in such a situation of emerging trends, because we do not know as to what is the right answer to this particular problem.
Got it. Thank you very much.
In fact, the COVID that we are talking of, and we say that post-COVID era, we do not know when is the post-COVID. But then we have started assuming, in the sense that when the government of India started Unlock 1.0, we thought that okay, now this is the time when we have to start thinking and fighting the pandemic. It's just not possible to just keep sitting and lying and take it that way. So we wanted to fight it off, and the whole country, in fact all over the world, is trying to fight this in their own way. We know that there are various ways to fight this, but nobody knows what is the correct way. Well, the correct way should be that we have to train ourselves so that we are in a position to have stronger immunity from all these viruses. And I see that the lectures which are are going to be delivered over the 2 days of 8th and 9th of August, starting from today itself. And the areas are varying. You can say that we are starting from even the knowledge of the virus, knowledge of the management practices, knowledge of the high-ended technology which can help in finding out the solutions to this. Many people have come out with various solutions, various designs, various simulations and things like that. But what is important is that we have to be keeping ourselves fit. I would wonder whether there is any lecture. I have not seen the whole list, but I am sure there should be a lecture on meditation, also on happiness, because this time we know that we had about 5,500 students after the lockdown on 25th of March, and we had very tough time. We knew that there is no medicine for this particular virus, and that is why the only thing which we could learn from this with the help of the students, that they have to be kept in good humor, because keeping the students at that age of 18-19, it's very difficult. In fact, it is difficult for all of us as well, because we don't want to see any program which is more than 1.5 hours longer than that, including the classes that we take. And you can imagine that the holding of the students in their rooms is very, very difficult. And during this period, we learned from them that the only thing that they can be happy is that talking to them and talking to them about what next will happen. They are talking, they wanted to know about their future and all that, which is, of course, nobody had any answer for that. But then we used to talk to them and say that, look, this is a situation which has come to us, and we should be in a position to fight every challenge in life which comes. And that is why about right from the month of March to June middle or so, we could keep those 5,500 students in good humor, and somehow or the other we are very happy now that most of them have gone except a few students who were working in the COVID projects, and that's why they are here with us, and still we are looking after them. But the fact remains that the difficulty that every whole world is facing is very, very difficult. In fact, all of us are aware of these. The idea behind this particular program was to see and learn from each other, because as I said earlier, that we do not know what is the exact answer, and in this sort of a condition, it will be better to learn from each other as to what are the various ways by which they can we can come across the pandemic, we can attack this pandemic, we can overcome this pandemic and start a new life. In fact, we used to say that there is a new normal which is going to come in our life. Of course, we see that this particular pandemic has created many challenges in front of us. At the same time, also kept our environment in fact is very free. We see that the water and the Himalayas can be seen from a very long distance very clearly. Those are the things which have come up, and in fact the ecosystem, the birds, the forest, every ecosystem has got in fact topsy-turvy, and possibly to some extent we find that this has also given us, while challenge, it has also helped the whole ecosystem. Well, some people may not agree that why this COVID should come. Fine, we had been, if I give an argument that we have spent several crores of money for cleaning the Ganga, and we have not cleaned the Ganga, and you know the result, what is the condition of water of Ganga today. And we were also talking of, in Delhi, we were talking of the environment and the pollution that we are talking of. We are talking, there is no pollution as such that we can see. So this while this has come with the pandemic has definitely affected us, it has also given us certain ideas and challenges all our ingenuity, all our academic knowledge, and help us to come out with innovative solutions. And that is why we see that IIT Kharagpur has come out with a you can say, I would not say exactly that it's a replacement of RT-PCR, but definitely to a great extent it has given a solution as to what we get out of RT-PCR. And in this particular device which our friends Professor Suman Chakravarti and his group has designed, I am sure that this will go a long way in solving the problem of testing as well as finding about this particular COVID. And not only that, this particular device is in a position to test any type of virus. That is what they are claiming. We are in touch with the ICMR, and we want that the actual testing should be done. And very recently we have made a contact with ICMR, and we are going to test that on the actual results and see how far we are close to RT-PCR's data. At the same time, we have also developed the masks, which are very cheap masks, but good quality masks that we have developed over here. Some of our friends have started working on ventilator design, and some of other friends are also working on different types of the equipment which are required. And you have seen all over the country and the world that companies, some of them who are in fact automobile industries, have come up with various types of ventilators where the ventilators were not there, and people were looking for these ventilators. We do not have the hospitals, and we can see that even in the grounds in makeshift arrangements of hospitals have been created. So these are some of the challenges which this particular COVID has given to us, and we have come across all these challenges. I am very happy that today I saw that about for more than 1500 students and people are joining, registered on this particular program. My friends from abroad, we are very grateful to each one of them who have taken time. I know that this is morning here, but in their locations it may be afternoon, and evening to some places night even. So I am very grateful to all of them that they have joined us, and in order to see that such a program really becomes useful. My friends who have at IIT Kharagpur, who has worked very hard for the last 1 month to see that such a program comes and it becomes successful. The various my faculty colleagues who have come forward to give lectures, as well as they have contacted their friends across the world for the various lectures which are there lined for the next 2 days or so. I am definitely confident that something will come out of this particular conference, which is an international conference. We have the blessings of the MHRD. Particularly, I am grateful to our Sri Amit Khareji, who has always supported us and mentored us each and every aspect. Whenever I just ring for some problem, immediately I am getting answer from you, sir. I am grateful to you, and we expect that this sort of mentoring and support that we will get from you in future also. We are very happy that you are here with us this morning, and this will definitely give us a big boost in the efforts that we are doing today. This is the first in the series, and as Professor Goswami has said, such a conference. We are hoping that the next conference, when it will be held, possibly it will be held in a in the situation where we will be meeting some of the people, because yes, it is said that this is also a way of understanding from each other, but at the same time there is something called peer learning, and when people stay at one location, we exchange several ideas to combat other things, not only the topic of discussion which is there, but then in the present situation which we have whatever we have arranged, I think the best this is what we could do. I am sure we will be in a position to come out with much more such efforts. There are various projects which have already been approved, and many of our friends, because of the projects, they could not, because of this pandemic, they could not go to the various places. At the same time, various the academicians who were supposed to come to India, they could not come, in fact, across the country. And we hope that if the situation becomes better, we will be in a position to have a collaboration with them, come out with something successful technology, and which will help elevating our ranking, because main thing which has been talked of today is because of the ranking. Definitely everybody would like to see IIT Kharagpur being top 10 in the world. This is what our mission. We have taken a very difficult mission of top 10 in the world, but definitely we are working in that. We have seen that the knowledge, enormous domain knowledge which IIT Kharagpur has, if we can tap that and show to the world, I am definitely confident that we will be in the top 10 in the world. This is all hope, and my friends are there with me, our students are there, our whole faculty. I think every decision that we have been taking here is a collective decision that we are taking with respect to each and every aspect of managing the institute. I have said that the institute is not managed by the director. In fact, it is managed by the faculty, the students and the non-faculty who are there, and each and every aspect. When we are thinking of becoming top 10 in the world, we have to think that each and every person must feel that he has something to contribute. I think with this, whatever I wanted to say today on this occasion, I would say that thank you to all of you here, and very big thank you to you, sir, that you are there with us, and we look forward to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tiwari, for providing the what kind of initiatives the faculty members of IIT Kharagpur has taken after the COVID. For that, we are really thankful to you, sir. Now, our chief guest is Honorable Sri Amit Khareji. Sri Amit Khareji is an administrative service officer of 1985 batch and is currently serving as Secretary, Ministry of Education, Government of India. He played a significant role in improving the administration and education system of states like Bihar and Jharkhand. Sri Khare has keen interest in education and served the State Elementary Education Secretary. He has served as Principal Secretary to Jharkhand Governor, and also he was Controller and District Magistrate of Patna. On 14th December 2009, Sri Khare assumed the charge of Secretary, Ministry of Education, with an additional charge of School of Education of our nation. Now I request Sri Amit Khareji to address the gathering. Sir, please.
Good morning to all of you. Professor V.K. Tiwari, Director IIT Kharagpur. Professor Shriman Bhattacharya ji, Deputy Director. Professor Singh, Registrar. Professor Goswami, who is the coordinator of SPARC. Professor Rintu Banerjee, convener of today's conference. Professor Chatterjee, Professor Murthy, all invited speakers and participants of this conference, faculty members, students, alumni of IIT KGP who are with us. A very good morning and namaskar to all of you. Let me start by congratulating not once but twice Professor Tiwari and the entire team of IIT Kharagpur. Firstly, for organizing this international online conference, which is extremely timely, relevant, not only for our national goals, but also for the international community and for bringing together experts from all over the world in an online mode for this conference. Second, and perhaps even more important, for which I would like to congratulate Professor Tiwari and the entire team of IIT Kharagpur, particularly the SPARC coordinator and the team under him, is that this is the first such international conference that we are having after announcement of the National Education Policy, which was announced last week on 29th July 2020. As most of our Indian friends would be aware, and for those who are joining us from abroad, I'd like to inform them that the National Education Policy announced by the Indian government places very special emphasis on research, on internationalization, on multidisciplinarity in the field of school and higher education. And what better example could be there than IIT Kharagpur, the premier institute of technology, the first IIT to be established in India, which has also moved towards healthcare and planning to have an entire institute of healthcare within the parent institute of IIT. And this conference also reflects the strengths of the institute in a multidisciplinarity environment. It also fulfills some of our desire for internationalization. For my international friends, I would like to inform that for the first time as a policy, Government of India has focused on internationalization of education to the extent that the best universities can even set up campuses in India, and Indian universities will be encouraged to set up campuses abroad. Because we feel that the knowledge can increase by these exchanges, by bringing together people from different countries, different backgrounds, different disciplines. And that is where the knowledge increases at the crossroads of these intermixing of disciplines. I have been informed that today's conference brings together international researchers and critical experts from diverse countries like USA, UK, Netherlands, Australia, Sweden, South Africa, of course, India, to discuss the latest advances in biomedical science and technology. I'm sure the experts will deliberate on subjects such as medical image based diagnosis, point of care sensor applications, about the use of AI and ML techniques, which will all help us in early detection and treatment of the disease. I'm also informed that experts have submitted abstracts covering these broad areas and others like point of care detection of bacterial infections and viruses, integrated lab on chip for diagnostics, prediction of prognosis of patients with long diseases, so on. As I said, this conference, which is the first such international conference to be hosted by an institute, by an Indian institute after the declaration of the new national education policy of the country, will go a long way in starting a process of internationalization and also exploring the newer areas of research, achievement of national goals, as also creation of knowledge for the entire world. Spark, as we all know, aims at improving the research ecosystem of India's higher educational system. IIT Kharagpur, particularly Director Professor Tiwari, has been very, very active in this field as the overall national convener of Spark. I have seen in the last few months, in fact, it appears as if Professor Tiwari has been the director for a very long time, the way he functions. Although I know that he had taken over only recently, he has been there almost since 31st December or so. Professor Tiwari, please correct me if I'm wrong. It was only for the last 7 months that you have spent as a director. But all the difficult situations that arose, particularly during the pandemic when IIT Kharagpur was having more than 4,000 students in their hostels, I'm totally convinced that the way the director and the entire team, in fact, as Professor Tiwari said, the institute is run by the faculty and the staff, but the leadership is of the director. So, under the leadership of Professor Tiwari, the way the entire institute rose to the occasion is indeed commendable. I'm sure this conference will be a grand success. Its research findings will be helpful not only for our country but also for the entire world. The point which was mentioned by Professor Tiwari about inclusion of yoga, meditation is also very important because behavioral change is equally important for tackling such pandemics. I once again congratulate all of you, particularly Professor Tiwari, his entire team, Professor Goswami, who is the coordinator of SPARK, and Madam Rintu Banerjee, who is the convener of today's conference, and wish the conference a great success. Thank you very much.
And encouraging words. We are really motivated. Now I request Amit Khareji and our director, Professor V.K. Tiwari, to e-open our abstract book, please. Thank you, sir. Now I request Professor Jyotirmoy Chatterjee, Head, School of Medical Science and Technology, to talk about the theme and objective of this conference.
Good morning or good evening, as the time may be of the participants. Respected guest of honor, Mr. Amit Khareji, the Secretary of MHRD Government of India, Chief Guest of the conference. Respected Professor V.K. Tiwari, respected Professor V.K. Tiwari, Director of IIT Kharagpur, the patron of the conference, Professor Sriman Kumar Bhattacharya, our Deputy Director, our Registrar, Professor Singh, our Honorable Deans, Professor Goswami, Professor Rintu Banerjee, Professor Manjunath, the convener of this conference, the dignitaries and participants. It is my great privilege to be present here on behalf of SMST as head of SMST here in the inaugural ceremony of the International Online Conference for the emerging trends in healthcare technology in the post-COVID-19 era. As we all know, the ongoing COVID-19 is caused by the severe acute respiratory syndrome virus 2, the SARS-CoV-2. The outbreak was first identified in 2019 in Wuhan, China. About 19 million human subjects are affected in more than 200 countries and with a death of more than 0.7 million people. Clearly, it is a disaster and the humanitarian crisis of epic proportion, and that has affected the whole world and at the same time unified the humanity like never before, particularly after disastrous Spanish flu in 1718. This COVID-19 pandemic, while mandating the physical distancing, has brought us closer each other like never before, mentally and philosophically, especially with the intense sharing of the scientific information to address the collective need to deal with the greatest survival challenge of the century. Researchers from every field of science and technology and cutting across the geographical boundaries are joining hands to tackle the ruinous medical problem, thus helping blur the artificial knowledge boundaries. While on one hand, researchers are trying to understand in depth the biology and the peculiarity of this RNA virus, possibility of its mutations and zoonotic dimensions, exploring human body's resistance and the fighting mechanism to this new threat. On the other hand, new techniques are being developed and improvised for precise and faster diagnosis, viral load detection, therapeutic interventions, as well as faster formulation of the effective vaccines. Additionally, technological inventions are being followed with great enthusiasm for relevant instrumentation and infrastructure, exploring regenerative medical supports, preventive measures including effective PPEs for the frontline health workers and the masses. In this field, the importance of the traditional medicine, herbal medicine from Ayush, our traditional Ayurveda, and the yoga, including yogic pranayam, food habits, also gaining remarkable attention. In this context, present conference appropriately aims at discussing the emerging trend of the healthcare technology in the realm of COVID-19 pandemic, and at the right time, School of Medical Science and Technology, the interdisciplinary platform for the IIT Kharagpur, responsible for advancing the medical science and technology, learning and research, has joined hand with the SPARK team of IIT Kharagpur to organize such conference involving international experts from diverse fields of medical science and technology for exchange of relevant ideas. We extend our sincere thanks to all the organizers for organizing such a beautiful and important conference or the learning event to address the prevailing challenges of COVID-19. Medical research with sense of knowledge continuum in finding solutions for such catastrophic challenge to human civilization, possibly which comes in a century. Thank you. Thanks to all.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee, for your motivating words. We are going to an end of this particular program. Before that, let me announce we will start our first session at 10:20 IST, Indian Standard Time. Now I request Professor PVSN Murthy, our SPARK team member, to give the vote of thanks.
Sabha Saraswati Namaha. Good morning, one and all. It is my pleasure to present a vote of thanks to this August gathering. Firstly, we thank the Ministry of Human Resource Development for selecting IIT Kharagpur as the nodal coordinator for conducting for Spark program. As the national coordinator of Spark, IIT Kharagpur has shouldered its one of the responsibility of organizing the first of the two thematic international conferences today and tomorrow. An appropriate theme has been chosen for the conference, seeing the requirements of the present day. I wish to express our sincere thanks to the Secretary, Ministry of Higher Education, MHRD, Sri Amit Khare, for agreeing to be the chief guest of this conference in spite of his busy schedule and extending cooperation to conduct this international conference at IIT Kharagpur. It is my pleasant duty to express our sincere thanks to Professor V.K. Tiwari, Director, IIT Kharagpur, for his encouragement, support and guidance for conducting this international conference at IIT Kharagpur. Sincere thanks to Professor Siman Kumar Bhattacharya, Deputy Director, Registrar Professor B.N. Singh, and all the deans for extending their support and also for sparing their valuable time and being with us on this occasion. I place on record our sincere gratitude and appreciation to all the keynote and invited speakers from India and countries like USA, UK, Australia, South Africa, Netherlands and Sweden. I place on record our sincere gratitude and appreciation to all the Spark project principal investigators and the School of Medical Science and Technology, IIT Kharagpur, for extending full cooperation in contacting the experts in medical science and technology all over the world. I thank all the session chairpersons for expressing their willingness in a shorter notice of time. The Spark team at IIT Kharagpur has worked like a team to organize this conference to promote the healthcare during this COVID-19 pandemic. Special thanks are due to Dr. Sutradhar of Central Library and his team and Mr. Shivshankar Das and his team for extending support in web-based broadcasting of this conference. Also, I place on record our gratitude to the Institute administration and supporting staff for providing us with all the necessary infrastructure. I thank all those who are extending their cooperation and support for the successful conduct of this conference. Thank you one and all. Have a good day. Thank you.
So thank you all. This is the end of our inaugural session. Our first session will start at exactly 10:20 a.m. IST. Thank you all.
Professor Partho Ghosh. Sir, if you can hear me, can you kindly switch on your camera and can we try the presentation once?
My camera is on, I think.
Okay, sir. Okay. Just a minute, sir.
My camera,
Sir, can you try sharing the screen presentation? We can just check once.
I'll just check. They're trying to put me to another screen. Let me see.
Okay, sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Okay, I'll try. It is still connecting. Can you see me now?
No, Bathada, actually they are trying technically to get the things all right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Bathada. Here is Kanchan Chaudhary. I can hear you. And they are trying to put you, your screen sharing issues that they are resolving it.
There's
কি হচ্ছে? Bathada, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, is your camera on or off? Just check.
I could see myself.
Yeah, but you see that whether camera is mute or your speaker is mute. Camera should be unmuted. Hello, Bathada, can you hear? Can you hear me? Hello.
উনি নেই কানেক্টেড নেই, আমি দেখতে পাচ্ছি না। Professor Partho Ghosh, can you hear us?
Yes. Is it solved? Is it done?
এবার ওনাকে প্রেজেন্টেশন শেয়ার করতে
Yeah, কে করবে? You করবে। আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, you have given permission.
প্রেজেন্ট
Now, Bhatada, can you see that your presentation is shared or not?
মাইক মিউটেড আছে ওনার
Your microphone is muted. Please-
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it is unmuted. But can you share?
You can. Yeah. I'm assuming you hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you
Okay.
can you see that whether you can share the presentation, please?
I think I can.
Yes.
I think I. Yeah, I think I can. You can get started.
Yeah, but please let us see that your presentation is shared and it appears on the screen.
Okay.
Now it has come. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. You can also make it full screen, Parthada.
Sorry.
You can also try making it full screen. Yeah, now it is fine. Now it's all done.
May I request all other participants except Professor Partho Ghosh to kindly keep their microphone muted and not to switch on their camera, please.
Good morning. Shall we start? Good morning, Professor V.K. Tiwari, our director, Professor Bhattacharya, our deputy director, Professor Singh, registrar, and all the participants and the organizers of the SPARK conference. It's a proud privilege for us to introduce today's keynote speaker, the keynote speaker of this opening day, Dr. Partho. Dr. Ghosh is BTech in chemical engineering in 1971, and thereafter he went to Massachusetts Institute of Technology to do a higher degree in chemical engineering and also management. And after that, he joined the famous management consulting company McKinsey, where he went on to become the partner of that company. And he has advised many corporate leaders and heads of states in
Everyone who is not speaking, please mute your mic. Everyone not speaking, please mute the mic.
and he has advised many corporates and government heads to do the economic to do the strategic, to solve the strategic and technological issues in many industries and the countries. Dr. Partho Ghosh also has a passion, and that passion is to interact with the students. So he has been attached to Tufts Gordon Institute to teach globalization and economics. He is teaching innovation, strategic technologies at the Fletcher School, and he is teaching leadership at MIT. He has also chaired several startups and Boston Analytics and Intersoft. And apart from his profession and passion in leadership, Dr. Partho Ghosh also has a mission. And that mission is to spread the awareness about various issues that are facing the mankind.
And one of those issues are the education, to take it to the lowest level, and various issues which needs a change in the mindset. And he believes that above the level of intelligence normally that we normally is searching for excellence, there is also a change of mindset and arising of the spirituality, and the person has to change internally. And with that mission, he has set up, both with his academic help and financial help, he has set up this Partha this Academy of Leadership at IIT Kharagpur, and he has been one of the founding members of the Boston Pledge that is doing a revolutionary work in the field of education and trying to determine that how a change of education can bring in the overall change of mankind. He will be talking today in this conference on a very important topic, that is imagining a post-coronavirus healthcare sector, prospects and possibilities ahead, transitioning through multiple points of inflection. And it is our proud privilege to invite Professor Partha Ghosh to deliver his keynote lecture today in the next 40 minutes. Thank you very much. Professor Partha Ghosh, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. All of you can hear me?
Yes. Yes, you are audible.
Thank you very much. Honorable Secretary, Ministry of Interior, Amit Khare, Professor Tiwari, Professor Simon Bhattacharya, Professor Goswami, Dr. Banerjee, faculty, staff, students of IIT Kharagpur. First, I'd like to extend my big thank you for giving me this opportunity. It is a great opportunity indeed. I feel humbled. At the same time, I feel highly challenged given the nature of the topic. But it is a time to reflect, time to think how we could connect the ancient wisdom of India. People talked about yoga, people talked about Ayurveda, with the futuristic technologies which are evolving all over the world. But most importantly, how do we connect humanity with nature? I think there are multiple dimensions that we have to think of, and those are the dimensions I would like to humbly explore with you. And once again, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate IIT Kharagpur, not only to host such an important event for the world, but at the same time, I came to know that only 2 days ago, IIT Kharagpur came up with a IIT COVID-19 test kit, first of the kind. And I think Dr. Shuman definitely deserves congratulations on behalf of everyone involved with IIT Kharagpur, within and outside, all over the world. So thank you very much for keeping the banner of IIT Kharagpur up. This is the way we achieve what Dr. Tiwari was talking about, to become number 10. Within the top 10, why not number 1? It would need a lot of innovation, a lot of courage, a lot of conscience, and that's what I would like to discuss today. Now, before I move on, I'd like to wish good morning to all of you east of Japan, or west of Japan. I think it's good afternoon in Japan, but good morning to all of you in Asia and Europe. And of course, good evening to those who are on the west of Chicago. And it is about 12:50 in the morning in Boston. So if I look sleepy, please excuse me, but given the nature of the problem that we are going to discuss, I hope I will be able to keep myself excited, and in the process, uncover some of the thoughts that I put together. Now, coming to coronavirus assault, if I call it, on human health is serious. And as days pass by, it is becoming more and more serious. But still, we hope it will be temporary. Some people feel it could be over in 3 years, but some people feel it could last another 5 to 7 years. But what is more challenging is the political and the economic upheaval it has unleashed across nations, which could last generations. So solving the COVID-19 problem it is a great opportunity for us to look at some of the fundamentals which are challenging society, challenging the relationship between humanity and nature, challenging the way we have connected with technologies. And I think that is what I think we should like to explore through this conference which IIT Kharagpur has organized over the next 2 days. And it is obviously a great responsibility for all of us to ensure that we do come up with, I would call initiatives, programs, which are as significant as the nature of the problem that we are trying to solve. By no means is it going to be easy. It would need creative thinking. It would need fundamental thinking. And I hope some of the thoughts I will share would help us to unlock that fundamental power within us. And particularly the great opportunity for IIT Kharagpur to define the course of humanity, the course of civilization, given the discussions that will unfold over the next 2 days. I would like to particularly thank the convener, Dr. Banerjee, for taking the initiative to pull this program together along with all the leaders of IIT Kharagpur and the individuals who are supported from the ministry, and particularly the secretary, who was very, very kind to give the opening address. Now, the topic that I've chosen today is to imagine a post-COVID-19 healthcare sector that has been triggered and the prospects and possibilities ahead. And in the process to move to the new world, whether the COVID stays with us for 5 years or 3 years, but however long it might stay, what is the new world that we could create in the process, and how do we transition to this new world? Now, in that process, I would like to cover 4 points. First, I'd like to really size up what is the size of the problem we are dealing with. And the responses that we have seen at the political levels around the world, even at WHO, has been less than adequate. And the question I'm raising, how could we avoid the Armageddon? Because of the course that we are on right now does not look too encouraging unless we could really find a new course. And that's one thing I like to sort of touch on this morning in Kharagpur, evening in, as I said, west of Chicago, and afternoon in Japan. The second point I would like to talk about is the situation. And as I would like to humbly make a point, that the situation in India is more critical, and we have to fundamentally think of the essential construct of healthcare, if we call it healthcare. And in fact, later on, I will talk about think of human care and how that could be fundamentally refreshed. Then I will move on to talk about how could this new high IQ human care system could be developed. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, how do we cultivate the courage, the creativity and conscience to be able to create a new human care system? And finally, given that this conference has been organized by IIT Kharagpur, I would encourage the leadership in academia to really lead the transition for the civilization. And I'd like to suggest that you give birth to 2 new terms. One I would call human care engineering, and the second one I will call bionware. And I'll explain the 2 as we go through this presentation. So first, let's try to see the challenge. You know, I've been talking about COVID-19. This is my 4th keynote address, by the way. Over the last 3-4 months, I've been speaking on COVID-19. First time it was in the month of January, where the total number of people affected was about 12,000. Then I spoke in a conference in China when it was on May 24th, when the number of people affected in the world was 5.5 million and number of deaths about 350,000. United States 1.7 million and about 100,000 people died on May 24th when I delivered the second keynote address, and the third one it went up. And today, August 8th, as I see the latest numbers, it has gone up in terms of the world number of people affected is almost close to 20 million, which is 4 times in a short period of about 3.5 months. The population affected in the United States is close to 5 million. And as you could see, number of deaths have also continued to rise. So obviously the challenge is more serious than we may think, because we have all the technologies of all kinds available, but yet the coronavirus, at least until now, has won the war against all the possible technologies and the systems that we have. So I personally feel it is a leadership challenge, leadership of all kinds, leadership at academia, leadership in business, leadership in government, leadership in schools. And we have to look at this challenge from the point of view, what is the new world that we could create? So instead of fighting coronavirus, we have to go to the fundamentals. What is not allowing, why we are not able to solve the problem, and look at the positive side, both in the microeconomic world as well as the macroeconomic world. So I like to spend some time to talk about this nature of the challenge so that we could really attack the problem with the right mindset, with the right kind of references, so that we could create a world that we are all proud of. So the first point is the coronavirus, putting it in perspective. And indeed, it has proven that how vulnerable and weak our civilization is. While the last 500 years has been a technological bonanza, but yet when we face such problems, seems like we are extremely feeble, extremely weak, and highly vulnerable. And in fact, I would like to take a position, if we continue the course that we are pursuing right now, we could really hit the Armageddon. And that's why I like to spend some time how to avoid the Armageddon. Now, this is a very important exhibit. Let me try to explain the x-axis and y-axis. A lot of data points here. I plotted here from 1901 till 2020. On the x-axis, global trade as a percentage of GDP. And why do I plot that? To understand how globally we have gotten connected. So when problems occur in one point of the world, it spreads very rapidly to some other point. Today, the global trade as a percent of GDP is 5 times more than at the beginning of the 20th century. And on the y-axis, you are looking at the population density. Obviously, the population of the world in 1901 was about 1.7 billion. Today is about 7.8 billion. The land mass is actually decreasing thanks to the global warming, but that's minor. But the population density has gone up 5 times. So what does that mean? We are more dense, we are more connected. So any infection occurs anywhere in the world, it spreads very rapidly. In fact, if you look through history, again, I'm going back to 1870 till 2020, what we have plotted here, again, the global trade as a percentage of GDP. Now, if you look at the occurrence of major pandemics, like the Spanish flu occurred, as you know, around 1918. Then the next flu was the Hong Kong flu in about late 1960s, early 70s. But if you look at this period, 2000, the number of pandemics, the frequency at which they have occurred has significantly increased. And obviously, because of the density and the connectivity, they have spread more rapidly and they become more dangerous. So today, the problem that we are facing is of historic in nature. And it also shows, given the frequency of these pandemics increasing more, as you could see in this corner, in the year 2000, this area, only shows that while we have mastered a lot of technologies, but we have remained extremely vulnerable to such attacks of nature. So I want to fundamentally raise the question that are we using the technologies properly to build the right kind of relationship between humanity and nature? And that's where I'm glad that some of you earlier talked about Ayurveda, talked about some of the ancient wisdom that was resident in our country in the foothills of Himalayas. And I think we have to find a way to resurrect as we go deeper into the discussion. Now let's see what's happened. When I look at the number of cases per day, it was almost nothing in January 21st. The first case in the United States appeared on January the 21st. Only one case in Washington, state of Washington. And as you could see, within a period of 3 months, we start seeing the rise. The green line is the United States. Unfortunately, this line is, the orange line here is India, rising very rapidly, catching up with the United States. And the Brazil has gone also quite wild. And you could see the rise of South Africa. All happened literally in 197 days. And the point here is that particularly the United States has failed to provide the kind of leadership. And the reason I'm underscoring that, US has been the hub, the center of all kinds of technologies, be it artificial intelligence, be it genomics, be it biotechnologies, chemical engineering technologies, you name, all the technologies that we need to solve the problems are in the US, but yet we have not been able to contain it and not been able to provide the kind of leadership US has typically offered to the world. Now, what is more important, if you look at this chart, we're looking at GDP per capita on the y-axis and the population of different countries. The width of each bar shows the population. So China, as you could see, occupies a bigger size because of the population. On the right side, you have the rich countries, on the left side, you have the poor countries. But what is interesting is the COVID-19, until about in the early April, was largely concentrated in rich countries like Italy, United Kingdom. Of course, it was spreading to Japan. And of course, it started in China, but China really got it under control. But now the COVID is spreading towards more vulnerable population, which is the 65% of the global population, where countries like Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, India, and many other poorer countries in Africa is getting affected. And that's something we have to worry about because typically the population density on those countries are significantly higher compared to the developed countries. And that's exactly what you're seeing. You see on the left-hand side, typical picture, which you are all familiar with, which are countries like Bangladesh, India, many countries in Africa. That's the lifestyle where they're talking about social distancing or physical distancing is a luxury. It's not understandable. So obviously, and yet people are extremely poor. And at the same time, they cannot afford to stay at home because they literally stay hand to mouth. So to solve this problem in a country like India or Mexico or Bangladesh is significantly more serious. And the good news is, if we take it seriously, we will perhaps develop a solution which the world would look up to. So I'm looking at this unfortunate challenge as an opportunity. We have the mindsets, we have the science, we have IIT Kharagpur from where we could hopefully manage the new process. But what we should really worry about the gradient that you see on the left, and that is becoming sharper and sharper, which means we could, if we do not take some quick actions at the same time work on the long term, we might lose control of the problem, and that could be quite dangerous. Now, when you look at the total number of cases, which is the number of people affected, it has gone up very rapidly. As you could see, that the United States is close to almost 5 million, India is 2 million, Brazil is about 3 million. The problem is expanding, and we are clearly not in control, and which I think is the challenge that we need to quickly come to terms with. Now, when you look at on the other side, there are sweet spots, even in a country like the United Kingdom, which was at the beginning not managing the process very well. It was able to bring down the number of cases, the new cases, quite rapidly. And obviously, when people have to work on some of the discipline aspects of controlling human behavior, how we move around, the problem could be contained, as we have seen in Germany, we have seen that in Korea, China, many of the Eastern Asian countries, and some of the Western European countries. So that's one side of the equation. The second point I like to also highlight, which is extremely important, and if you look at the development of civilization, development of science and technology in the last 60, 70 years from 1970 to today, it has basically been driven by two very fundamental forces. One, which I will call the y-axis, the degree of liberalization. Countries around the world have liberalized to give power to the free markets. In the process, we have seen a lot of innovation. And at the same time, the degree of globalization increased, which has facilitated exchange of knowledge. And we have indeed moved very gradually when countries were less globalized, the countries had the concept of self-reliance. But on the other side, self-reliance only works when we can rely on others and others can rely on us. That's the concept of self-reliance that we have to think of. And that's where I get very concerned, because if you look at the geopolitical environment today, there are all the signs that we are moving towards an Armageddon. Why? Because the governments are becoming more inward-looking. The companies and businesses are also becoming quite conscious. You know what's going on between TikTok and between many of the other Chinese companies in the United States. Supply chains are getting disrupted. And in the process, the whole concept of globalization, matching of special skills have gotten disrupted. And that's dangerous, because while we are trying to solve difficult problems, everything that we have built is getting shaken up. And in the process today, at least I can speak for the United States in Boston, there's significant amount of more of despair than hope, which is the rising degree of negative energy. And that is something I would really like to underscore. To solve difficult problems, we need positive energy, but around the world, there's a decent degree of negative energy, which we have to solve. And that's why the Leadership Institute that IIT Kharagpur, or the Leadership Academy that IIT Kharagpur is building, is going to become even more important to cultivate the positive energy. And in the process, the Armageddon that you see could happen, we could avoid. So I look at the problem that we're going to discuss in the next few moments as something very serious, which would need not only good scientific and technological thinking, it would need good leadership, it would need good economic thinking, fiscal measures, the monetary measures, they all have to come together. And that's what you're seeing here, because what has happened in the last 3-4 months in name of COVID-19, governments have printed money, they spend $10 trillion, lot of unemployment, but often we do not realize where does the money come from. Now, obviously, rich countries could borrow money. So as you could see on the right side, the advanced economies have got debt, which is about more than 100% of the GDP. But when you look at the low-income countries, obviously affording debts more than 70% is extremely risky, because the economic capacity of poorer countries is significantly less. And India is already entering the red zone. So when I look at the problem from the context of India, on one side, we have a high density population, which is unfortunately poor. On the other side, the fiscal measures that we are working with, or the monetary measures that we're working with, has also put us in the red zone. So we really need a creative approach, and in the process help the country come out of it. Now, just to put things in perspective, when I first spoke on COVID-19, which was on January 31st, with a small group of my students at the Tufts University, the size of the population affected was about 12,000. And there was a hope it will go up, and there was a green curve, and that was a desirable path that people were talking about. Next time when I spoke on May 25th, it was 5.5 million, and I could see the exponential rise. And next I spoke on July 20th, it was 14.5 million, and the curve shifted towards the left. And now we are at 19.25 million, about 2 hours back, number of people affected by COVID-19. So when we are talking about what would be the response of the healthcare system, I think we have to really think of on one side ensuring that the curve does not move more towards the left, but more importantly, as I'm indicating here, how to ensure that we could quickly come back to the green line. So the challenge here is that we need some very good short-term measures and yet be able to solve the long-term problem. It is very unique in nature because normally when we are solving a fundamental problem, we could take a longer-term approach. But here we have to be on one side extremely practical and surgical, and at the same time be extremely transformational. And that's where I think the role of IIT Kharagpur and this conference is extremely important, because we are right now in the middle of a tornado. And if we take the current way of approaching that, the way we are tweaking, this is a myopic approach. We need a new approach, which is, I would call the holistic approach of looking at healthcare, not as healthcare, I would call it human care. We have looked at it from a fundamentally different perspective, particularly in nations where the healthcare capacity, if you measure it in terms of number of hospitals or number of doctors per millions, or number of beds available for people, is significantly limited. We have to think in new terms. And that leads to my second point, which is the situation, as you know, I don't have to talk about it, but I would like to put it in perspective. The situation in India is more fragile and it's significantly more critical. So the essential construct, if I may use the word, of the healthcare system will need to be fundamentally refreshed. If we think that we have to come up with solutions within the current construct, it will be tweaking. We need to fundamentally change course and come up with a new approach. And this is a great time if we look at education, health, science, technology with a holistic perspective, and in the process creating the new movement. Now, I'm looking at, again, a chart. I always, as you know, I work with numbers. You're looking at the degree of preparedness of the healthcare system of various countries. And what did I look at? The number of hospital beds on the y-axis per million population and number of doctors per million population. And as you know where India is indeed in a more vulnerable position. The other countries are, as you could see, how they're plotted. So India is a challenge. Not only that the number of coronavirus cases are increasing, but our ability, the healthcare ability's capacity to deal with this is significantly lower compared to any other country. On the other side, if we look at the right side, what I'm calling degree of vulnerability. And what are we plotting here? The population density. Because the higher the population density, more difficult would be to practice what we are calling social distancing or physical distancing. India is high, like South Korea and Japan, and the percentage of population above 65. India is low, but still India is in the red zone, because people who have got on the high population density and people and the percentage of population greater than 65, obviously there's no more vulnerable. So now if I combine these two exhibits into one, the left-hand side I'm calling degree of vulnerability, and left-hand side I'm calling the degree of preparedness, on the right side, the degree of vulnerability. I'm collapsing the two axes into one. Now, it would be adequate if we are less vulnerable and degree of preparedness is low, is fine. So this line is, I would call the equilibrium line. This area, the gray area, is the surplus, which means we are more prepared than we need to. And this is the vulnerable area. We are less prepared than we need to. So then I plot these, and this is how India looks. So obviously India is lonely, and it is in a very vulnerable region, where the degree of vulnerability is high and the degree of preparedness is low. So obviously the adequacy of the current healthcare system is extremely fragile. Now that doesn't mean that we have to now think of how to increase number of beds or doctors. it means that we have to be significantly more creative. And that's exactly what Japan did about 100 years ago when Japan was trying to improve the productivity of land, because, as you know, the population density in Japan is high. The land available for agriculture is low because Japan is largely covered with mountains. The focus was improve the productivity of land. And today, as you know, Japan has the highest productivity of land, whether you measure in terms of rice or different kinds of other vegetables. So we have to also think in terms of productivity of the human care system, given the resources that we have. Now, if you look at India, this is how India looks like. These are numbers are very well known. There are close to 16,000 primary healthcare centers where there's just one doctor or none. The prevention really doesn't exist, no institutional process in place. And the WHO guidance for healthcare, is about 1,000 per doctor, one doctor per 1,000 patients. But India is about 11,000 for every 11,000, one doctor. And on the right side, most of the country, most of the states are in the red zone. And blue zone is actually meeting the WHO standards, red zone. Fortunately, I noticed West Bengal is very well positioned, maybe because of IIT Kharagpur. Generally, the country is a new approach. And what is more interesting, if you look at the number of diseases, infectious diseases from 1940s till today, it has continuously increased. By the way, the 2000 number is till 2004. So actually the number is about 150 when they normalize it, but the actual number that has been counted is about 30. But clearly the number of infectious diseases in the world is increasing. And on the right side, this is the work done by economists. The red zones are the more vulnerable areas. And obviously, as you could see, India, along with the eastern part of China, looks red. And obviously, the people of India have to take the global challenge significantly more seriously, not only because the problem is in India, but this problem is a global problem. And this is a unique opportunity that India is presented with to solve a problem which is serious for India, and we have to connect with the problem with the highest level of seriousness. So if this is the challenge, which is on the left-hand side, that we are in the most vulnerable region, I've laid out what does it take to deal with the challenge so that we could indeed come up with solutions, with ideas which the world would look up to, and in the process we'll be able to solve the challenges in the country. The first thing I think which is most important, particularly when you're talking about transformational change, is intellectual humility and the spirit of inquiry. Because if we look at the problem, because this is how I solved the problem in the last 30 years, and I extend that straight line, we would not be able to succeed. We have to really take the spirit, as Tagore used to say, Janar Maje Ajanare Korechi Shandhan. That's a very powerful statement. Within the known, we have keep searching for the unknown. Or Shimar Maje Oshim Tumi. That spirit, that how to look outside of the limits, the unlimited opportunities. And we can only do that when we can keep our egos outside. The second thing that we have to cultivate, the selflessness in service and the courage at the same time to imagine the future system. If we think of the future by tweaking the current, I think we will continue to struggle and we will be always behind because the gap is too severe. The third, we need to develop a system which is agile, where we can cultivate new ideas, new habits, so that people can lead a healthy life. We talked about yoga, we talked about Ayurveda, but how come we are not practicing it in every village? We have to think about bringing back some of the ancient wisdom. We have to bring back civic discipline, clean living, which really doesn't need money, but needs certain amount of practices which we do in the right way. And finally, awareness of hygiene in all people. So these are the 5 conditions that we have to satisfy as people interested in healthcare. These are all soft. Next, I'll go into the hard part, which is the science and technology bit. But unless we fix, because to me, healthcare means human care, and human care means how we engage with humanity, or how we can help humanity to engage with nature or engage with each other. So that part has to be a significant part of the future, what I would call the human care system. And depending upon how we deal with it, it will determine the trajectory of the economic recovery. Because we have dropped. And a country like India, which is already poor, it cannot afford to drop too much. On the other side, it cannot open up too quickly, because if you do so, given the nature of the density of our population, the COVID-19 would become even more serious. So it is a double whammy. On one side, we have to deal with economics. On the other side, we have to manage this time of recovery and the trajectory of recovery, this angle. And so the design of the healthcare system would determine how we design the economic recovery. So I think this conference has a very important significance. And Dr. Banerjee and others, I hopefully would bring together thought processes from all over the world, which will not only create the new healthcare system or human care system, but help the economic recovery. Because if the recovery process is such, it connects with the healthcare systems well, then only I think we will see a new world emerging. So that leads to the new framework that I'm going to share with you, that the design of the new healthcare system, which is the x-axis, and the economic measures the Prime Minister's office and the central bank is thinking of, they have to be coordinated. We cannot think in isolation. And that's where, again, the role of the Leadership Academy that IIT Kharagpur is working on becomes important. And how do we connect scientific approaches related to healthcare with the economic approaches, particularly when you're dealing with a crisis like coronavirus, so that indeed that we could give birth to new business and economic models. And that would determine what would be the shape of the recovery. I'll not get into the details of this, but I think it's important to understand the response from the healthcare system. If it is quick, if it is transformational, and the government measures are highly targeted and surgical, because state by state, literally by, I would say, province by province, the measures have to be different, because the nature of demography is different, nature of problems people are facing are different, at the same time, nature of healthcare issues they're facing are different. So only way we could make the recovery faster, which is to be in this quadrant, we have to literally satisfy 4 fundamental requirements in aligning healthcare technologies, creation of the new human care system, which I'll explain in a moment, with the government fiscal or economic measures. And those 4 conditions are, firstly, we have to develop a healthcare system not only fights, but avoids future viruses. The current virus we have to fight. It should help creation of new industries. And that's where I think India has the greatest opportunity. As we redo the healthcare system in name of human care system, we could give birth to new industries, new employment. So as we solve the problem, which is related to healthcare, we create new opportunities, create new kind of incentives to transform industries. And most importantly, particularly in India, we cannot think of healthcare without thinking of social re-engineering. And again, I'm going back to the word human care. So that leads to my third point, and which is perhaps the core of what I want to discuss today. That how do we cultivate new habits, new preferences, new models, so that we open up new possibilities, which I'm calling the high IQ human care system. And obviously it would need to be pursued with a lot of courage, a lot of creativity, and a new sense of conscience. So in the next few exhibits, I will discuss what do I really mean? What I mean is, how do we bring this, we create this strategic triangle where we bring the three pillars together. One is containing the virus, which is the short term. Long term is the reconstruction, the reformation of the healthcare system. And again, I would quickly share with you where I'm calling it human care. And then, of course, re-engineering of social behaviors. In fact, if you connect the three, now those three pillars defines what I am calling the human care system. And of course, when we talk about re-engineering of social behaviors, we have to keep all these 5 points in mind. What does physical distancing mean? What does remote learning mean? If 3-5 years we have to fight the virus, how do we manage the remote learning, remote education, digital etiquettes? Digital etiquette.
Can I request you to wind up in another 5 minutes if it is possible?
Yeah, I'll try very much.
Okay, thank you.
You not? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about it.
Yeah, thank you. So that leads to a lot of different opportunities. Let me skip a couple of these exhibits, but this is important that as we think of the new approach, there are 4 types of industries the healthcare system has to connect with. One would be what I'll call the accelerators. Much of the future human care would be determined by how do we leverage artificial intelligence, how do we bring communication services, logistics services, which I'm calling the technologies of the industry which will accelerate the development of the new system. Then we'll talk about rescoping, which is the type B industries. So there have to be different kinds of industries that we have to think of which would drive the healthcare system. So you cannot really look at healthcare system in isolation because it is central in many ways and it is dependent upon multiple different industries which together serves the healthcare system. I'm going a bit rapidly. So in India, or in much of the world actually, this is how people look at the healthcare system. We do not talk about much of prevention. It is basically diagnosis, checking, people become patients, we treat them, and they go out of the system. What I'm proposing, a new way of looking at the world, which I'm calling the human care system. When we talk about yoga and Ayurveda and yogic practices, meditation, which we're all touched on, I call them prevention 0, prevention 1. So particularly for India is very important because our healthcare system has limited capacity. But if we can keep people healthy through prevention 0 and 1, the need of this area would significantly decrease. At the same time, we could modernize this area. And then, of course, another area we do not worry about is the post-treatment area, so that we could collect data, collect information, and in the process, significantly increase I'm calling the human care system, which is the healthcare system should think of lifestyle, think beyond diagnosis and treatment, think of all the other areas. And fortunately, some of the points were touched earlier, like yoga, fitness programs. This is what I've prevention 0. But how does the human care system talk about lifestyle, healthy living, diet, nutrition, yoga? Prevention 1 to me is more the hygienic practices, wearables through which we can keep track of people's health, a two-way communication system before people become patient. Then after all, when people become patient, there's also a lot of things we could do differently in terms of diagnosis, treatment, and of course, equally important would be post-treatment. Since I have limited time, this is the picture I see. So on one side, we have to mobilize the conventional healthcare system, which is doctors, medicine, treatments, diagnostics. But at the same time, we have to bring to play a significant amount of information technology power, communication power, artificial intelligence power, social media, big data, analytics. And that's what is the second point I'm making. First, we have to take a broadened view. Secondly, we have to bring both information technologies and biotechnologies in the play. Here we are seeing a rapid rise of artificial intelligence in the healthcare sector in the United States, particularly how the vector machines and neural networks are playing a very, very important role in driving AI. That leads to my final point, and I'll try to do it in 3 minutes. And if Kanchan allows me 2 minutes more, I'll do it in 5 minutes, which is what is the role of leadership in academia? And that's where I would like to leave behind two passwords, one which I'm calling human care engineering, the other one I'm calling bionware. And I'll go quickly. This is how I look at the role of the healthcare system. On one side, you have to understand, in any healthcare system, you have to understand the human, the society. What are the social needs, and how do I design what I will call the humanware engineering, which includes prevention, which I discussed a bit earlier, type 1, prevention type 2, and of course the conventional healthcare system, how that could be renewed with significant increase in use of digitization of healthcare system, which I call it the high IQ system. So this is on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, how do we bring to play multiple technologies, which I'm calling bionware, which I'll explain to you in a moment what do I mean by bion. But how do we bring genomics and bioinfo technologies with artificial intelligence and augmented reality with new types of sensors and sensing technologies so that we could do better tracking and tracing. So if you ask me what would be how would the new healthcare system evolve, it would depend upon how innovatively we can link both the left and the right side of the equation. Left side is systems engineering, right side is bion. So I'll pass this, and that's where we need new mindset. How to make uncommon connections. We are very good in making common connections. If I have biotechnologies, I talk to my friends in biotechnology world. But uncommon connection, how do I talk to a psychiatrist or social scientist with artificial intelligence expert to make uncommon connection and interportability in our thinking? So through that, we could recreate the new human care system in multiple platforms, which will include enlightened and healthy living, which include high IQ procedure platform or high IQ healthcare system, and of course, post-treatment, how do we mobilize smartphone applications so we can really track people post-treatment, and in the process, keep creating a database of 1.4 billion people. And that would be the real power. People today talk about Tesla. Tesla's real power is ability to continuously collect information to create a database. And with 1.4 billion people in the nation with all kinds of problems, how do we create a database through which we could innovate new types of solution? And to do so, we have to learn, and this is where I'm introducing bion. To me, bion is linking biotechnologies, including genomics, bioinformatics, with information technologies, which I would position what we call artificial intelligence, AR, with optical technologies, which use of light, photoconductivity, optical circuits, and of course, nanotechnologies, where we are talking about very, very small injections to sense to delivery mechanism. And that is what I'm calling the bionware. And that is a new kinds of thinking that we have to bring together, where people are learning about these 4 very different specialties, expertise, to create integrated solution. And that's exactly what is happening when we talk about Moderna. Moderna is, as you know, is a new company based in Boston. They are ahead in designing of the COVID-19 vaccine. But if you really look at the different components of Moderna, we're talking about chemistry, we're talking about information, we're talking about processes, chemistry, different kind of IT, and then different kind of delivery mechanisms, which needs a lot of nanotechnology, material technology, knowledge. So today, if we look at a biopharma company, it is basically a bioware company. So could IIT Kharagpur bring all these technologies? I would not go into details, to bring from automation to advanced materials to genomics to artificial intelligence to create the new world. So in the last 3 slides, I will quickly summarize. So the strategic response to COVID-19 for a premier institute like IIT, as we have the aspiration to become one of the top 10 universities of the world, this is a great opportunity. Only if we could bring these 3, the leadership to me means how to help people think in new dimension, to lead new movements, think out of the box, and hopefully Leadership Academy, which Kanchan is setting up, will do that. Human care engineering, how does we connect with humans in form of systems and the bionware, so that ultimately we could indeed build a new type of relationship between human and nature. That's where the last 500 years technologies have not been able to do justice to nature. It has been an exploitative relationship. The way technologies have developed, we have exploited nature, whether we talk about oil and gas, whether we talk about land, whether we talk about minerals. We have taken it out, we process it, throw it in the landfill. We are creating a lot of more garbage than the landfills could take. We have to switch towards enriching relationship with nature. And that's where I think IIT Kharagpur would give birth to a new movement. It would need multiple transitions. As you could see, I would have spent 1 hour on this one, but maybe next time. But what I'm saying is, in multiple levels, we have to make a fundamental transformational change. Just to highlight few, I think science in last 200 years has been reactive science. We face a problem, we apply the science. We have moved to what I call proactive science or value-focused search. We have to look at new frontiers, again talking about Tagore, Jana Maje Ojana. Ojana, the unexplored area, we have to engage in a proactive fashion. We have to move away from silos initiatives to cross-discipline agile networks. We have to go beyond global conferences to global problem-solving approaches. We have to move from hierarchical, discipline-centric decision-making to entrepreneurial, human-centric decision-making. And that I will just like to give you the key takeaways. Key takeaways for this conference, I believe, is how do we first develop ourselves with a system, a resilient system, which could prepare ourselves to create a new human care system. Second, evidence-backed authority. I think people are making a lot of judgment calls in the United States, as you know, is very common, but it's happening all over the world. How to move towards an evidence-backed authority, and then, of course, significant emphasis on leadership education. So what I would like to do is to end with this exhibit, where the basic message is that as we go to the world, new world, we have to think of how to give birth to a new type of engineering, which I'm calling humanware engineering. New kind of hardware is not hardware, not software, but something we are calling a bionware or a hybridware. And in the process, hopefully we could create a world where the new model will become significantly more human-centered. We will give higher level of expression to leadership qualities. And in the process, what is important for IIT Kharagpur, I'm so glad that it's an international conference. We truly celebrate a spirit of globalization, global problem solving. And that's the way IIT Kharagpur could earn the stature in the top 10 universities of the world, that we solve global problems, but yet we connect with the local issues with highest level of reverence to our people. Our people are struggling. As you know, 1.4 billion people's life is not very easy. We need the new dynamics which must inspire our civilization to define a new trajectory that avoids the likely Armageddon. The question is, do we not want to build the status quo? And I really want to underscore, it would need a fundamental shift in our thinking, and that's where I'm very, very also glad to be part of the Leadership Academy, and that's what we need. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for this great opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was indeed a mesmerizing talk, to tell it in one sentence. And we have received hundreds of messages from the listeners, both faculty and also the students. And all these messages have been recorded with their email addresses, and probably we'll be sending them to Professor Partha, and maybe that answers will be recorded wherever we bring out the proceedings maybe. I will only take one of the questions which have been given, which probably have been answered already in your talk, Professor Ghosh, and it is from Mallika Chaudhary of Vishwabharati University. She asks that besides the population density problem and also the poor medical facilities in India, can we say that educational status or the way that education has been imparted in India is also been responsible behind the situation that we are not able to tackle COVID problem effectively? What do you think and what do you say, sir?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I personally, that's why I like the word instead of healthcare. And a lot of human care, particularly if you look at what we were talking about, the first two parts, which we're calling the prevention 0 and prevention 1, I think that's where much of the emphasis has to be, which is at the basic primary school level, how could we inject programs where people learn the way to live clean, the way to live healthy, the way to engage with diets which make strong individuals. So I think our health system, human care, which is broad in its perspective. Sorry, there was some interruption. So that is my quick response. We have to take a broader approach. We have to connect with the problems as we see it, not to just solve the problems as they occur, but how not to cause the problems, which means the first two steps that I laid out would be very, very important in design of the future human care system.
On behalf of the organization, also for the hundreds and thousands of listeners all over the world, and particularly also in India, the students and the faculty, we all thank you very much, Professor Partha, for the wonderful and mesmerizing lecture that you have delivered. I'm sure for all the people who have listened, and it will set the way that how we can tread the path of solving these problems in the future. Thank you very much, and let us give him a big hand from all this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and good evening to all of you. So today we are going to start the first technical invited session. In this session we have 4 speakers, Professor Sarso Ivanovsky, Professor S. Mukherjee, Dr. Sushmita Roy Chowdhury, and Dr. Keonosh Nasarpur. So we start with Professor Saso Ivanovsky, and I would request Professor Ivanovsky to deliver his lecture on the topic Tissue Engineering Strategies for Orofacial Recognition. I would like to give a brief bio sketch of Professor Saso. He is a professor in periodontology and a director of research at University of Queensland of Dentistry. He leads a specialist training program in periodontics, and he also combines his specialist with surgical implant dentistry. He has published over 170 peer-reviewed literatures, papers, and also leads an internationally recognized research group with an interest in regenerative dentistry, biomaterials and tissue engineering, as well as clinical periodontics and implant dentistry. Professor Saso, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that very nice I will now share my screen and continue with my presentation. So I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to speak to you, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. I know this is an international conference and a great initiative at what is obviously quite a difficult time for everyone, but we do need to share our experiences, our ideas, our research, so it is very timely that we participate in these sort of activities. As the introduction said, I'm a dental surgeon or a periodontist that works at the University of Queensland in Australia. I'm the Director of Research and the Professor of Periodontology at the dental school there, and I've more than 20 years experience in tissue engineering. So I would like to share some of my ideas about orofacial regeneration and regenerative dentistry. And obviously this is not something that's directly related to COVID-19, but certainly it is related to the various technologies that are going to be certainly with us in the future in the post-COVID world. So the first part of this lecture, let me start by addressing the problem that we're faced with. And there are a number of reasons that we can have problems or the need for regeneration in the orofacial region. So I'm sorry if some of these pictures are quite confronting, but this is real life situations. So we can have some major issues with the orofacial structures due to trauma, due to cancer and resection, developmental problems as well. But these large and quite significant problems, which are not that common, fortunately, can certainly be addressed with tissue engineering tissue engineering solutions. But I want to focus in this particular lecture on some very common problems that we face worldwide that are also potentially resolvable through the use of tissue engineering and regenerative medicine. So periodontal disease and tooth loss are two very, very common worldwide problems. They are highly costly to address and affect a large part of the population. So let me start first by talking about tooth loss. And this is obviously a very common problem. And the consequences of tooth loss are particularly relevant to this topic. What happens after teeth are lost is that you lose a lot of the bone and structure that keeps these teeth in place. So unfortunately, not only do people lose the function of the dental function due to the removal of teeth, but also the surrounding bone that kept those teeth in place is resorbed significantly over time, because the only reason that tissue exists is to keep the teeth in place. So when the teeth are lost, this tissue tends to resorb, and the resorption is quite extensive. So this is a functional problem, but also an aesthetic problem that can affect, and both the functional and aesthetic issues can affect the well-being of the patient, the quality of the life of the patient, and the self-esteem of the patient. So we do need solutions for these problems, but to get really good solutions for the problem, we do need to address the specific challenges of this particular area, anatomical area, because a lot of work has been done on tissue engineering and regenerative medicine, and the translation has not really hit the mainstream as yet. And I think one of the problems we have is that we are not really targeted enough with some of our applications. So sometimes people talk about bone. When they talk about bone, they talk about all bone in the body. But I think the applications for certain areas are different. And in the dental, on the oral space, the biggest issue that we have is the need to create space. And we need to create space and maintain that space, because this has been the problem that we encounter, is that the bone has been lost and the tissues have shrunk. So in order for us to bring that bone back so we can reconstruct the lost tissues, we need to create space, we need to regenerate the bone, and importantly, we need to keep the bone there. So this is where tissue engineering has some very good opportunities for us. And the concept of tissue engineering will be familiar to many of you. It's essentially the idea of trying to create a tissue outside the body for it to be subsequently implanted into the body. Now, generally speaking, we have three types of components that need to come together in order to achieve tissue engineering. So it's cells, a scaffold to carry the cells, and then some instructive signals or the correct environment. So these three aspects need to come together either individually or ideally two or three of these are usually utilized in the tissue engineering concept. Now, because of the specific requirements of the orofacial regeneration, the scaffold is the main requirement, in my view, for orofacial regeneration. So I want to focus on the scaffold component because this is absolutely essential for the maintenance and creation of space. So the idea would be when tissue is lost, like we can see here, that we've lost bone associated with the tooth loss, the idea would be to utilize a scaffold to replace that bone. And 3D printing offers some very good opportunities here to achieve favorable regeneration. So what is 3D printing? I think just let's spend a moment to think about what exactly is 3D printing. So it is an additive manufacturing process. This is very important to recognize. It's an additive manufacturing process that creates a 3D object from a numerical file via a layer-by-layer deposition of a material. Okay, so that is 3D printing. And it's used in many aspects of life at the moment. And certainly something that's been utilized in the context of COVID-19, for example, is face shields, 3D printing for face shields. But, that's just really something to put in a little bit of a COVID-19 flavor to the presentation. But, we're using 3D printing to make clothes, to make food, to make, even cars and houses. So it's certainly very much a buzzword at the moment. And it has also been used in dentistry and other medical professions. But I think what we need to think about is 3D printing in the context of tissue engineering is quite different to the probably more conventional 3D printing. And more conventional 3D printing, even in dentistry and medicine, is used to make models and prostheses and guides that are not implantable. So these are very important tools that can help us plan our surgeries, even execute our surgeries or our medical treatments. But it's different from implantables and 3D printed scaffolds and constructs for implantation into the body. So for implantation, you need some additional very specific requirements. One is biocompatibility, and the other one that's very important is porosity and vascularization, and then controlled resorption. So if you want to utilize a scaffold or a 3D printed construct for tissue engineering purposes, you need to consider this very, very important criteria. Let's talk about the concept that I'm proposing today. It's the idea of almost what we call now the fourth industrial revolution, the convergence of various digital technologies. for better outcomes for patients. So this would involve, in our application, advanced imaging, digital data to identify and characterize the problem for that particular patient, additive manufacturing and 3D printing that I've just discussed, and then modern surgical approaches which may be also optimized and augmented through digital planning. And the idea is to create these personalized, customized, tissue-engineered constructs. We need the right sort of materials to work with, and I think we need to be practical with our approaches. So, there's certainly a lot of discovery science in biomaterials, and we're coming up with some amazing materials. However, a lot of those will take a long time to be brought into the clinic. So we choose to work with quite an established biomaterial, which is polycaprolactone. It's a polymer, a resorbable polymer. And the reason we work with this is it's got some favorable properties and features. So it's a medical grade material with TGA approval. It's got excellent biocompatibility. It's alloplastic, so non-human or animal origin. It's got a reduced bone resorption. This is very important for our applications because we want to create space and maintain it for a period of time. We don't want anything that resorbs too fast because we'll go back to the beginning of our problem. And we need something that we can make customized scaffolds with and have great control over the material, and polycaprolactone allows that. It's been used in various medical applications. It's got FDI and TGA approval, for example, for tracheas, and in orthopedics it's been used a lot. And also there's been some early work also done for using it in the oral situations. It does have some disadvantages, however. It's got low bioactivity and a low resorption rate, which we need to address, and I'll talk about that more in this presentation. So when you think about translation of our approaches, we really need to look at probably two components, or at least what I will focus on today is two components. So one is the biology and the preclinical studies about trying to do the basic biology of bringing this to reality, to the clinical translation, and then look at workflow and design. So in terms of the first part, the biology, just to put things in context, where we are with this is really right at the translation between our large animal models and the humans. So we are just starting our human trials with these approaches. But so what I will be presenting today is our large animal data that underpins these concepts. So the first study I want to showcase here is a biomimetic scaffold for vertical bone augmentation to address the problem that I talked to you just earlier, where we lose large volumes of alveolar bone and we want to regenerate this bone. So for this, we require a suitable scaffold that mimics the architecture of the original tissue, and we can achieve this through 3D printing with PCL. Now, remember, PCL, as I said earlier, has got low bioactivity, so we need to augment the bioactivity with a growth factor, and we use BMP2 via a hydrogel delivery, which offers the advantage of sustained release over time. Now we've 3D printed this scaffold. So these are just prototypes and standardized sizes that we use. And our large animal model was a large calvarial defect model in an ovine, basically a sheep. So we expose the skull of the sheep, and we implant the scaffolds on top of the skull to achieve extraskeletal bone regeneration, which mimics what happens or the requirements for vertical bone augmentation. So what we essentially have in this particular study is protective domes that are filled with various materials, either with or without a scaffold. So we have some controls, empty domes, and the domes filled either with a gel, with a hydrogel and the BMP2 to different doses, or filled with the scaffold and the gel and the BMP2. So let's have a look at these results in the first part of this study, and you can see here that we actually quite successful after an 8-week healing period to achieve vertical bone growth Nothing. We don't get much growth in the absence of the scaffold and of the gel, but with the introduction of both the gel and in particular when the gel is mixed with the BMP2 and the scaffold, we can see that we get better bone resorption here. So on this particular graph, we've got the various controls with very little bone regeneration. Then the PCL with the gel without the BMP2 getting a little bit better. The gel itself with the growth factor will also fill some bone within this dome. And then when we have the scaffold, we get the most predictable regeneration. So this is quite interesting, but again, not super unique, because we know if we use the technique of guided bone regeneration where we create space, we can achieve bone regeneration. It's comforting to know that the scaffold improves this, but we can achieve it in even without the scaffold. What is particularly important now and very relevant to our particular application is if we regenerate this bone, will it stay there? So the second part of this study was removing our dome. And what happens when you remove the dome is you've got the bone underneath, either with just the gel, as you can see here, or with a scaffold. So in both cases, you have regenerated some bone. So we then want to see what happens to this bone over a period of time now that the protective dome has been removed. And we also put some dental implants into the scaffolds to mimic the clinical situation. So after another 8 weeks, which we call the resorption part of the study, we can clearly see, and this is what we also see clinically, that if that newly regenerated bone will resorb. And this is our big challenge. So if you try to grow it outside the existing envelope of the bone, like what we call vertical bone augmentation or extraskeletal bone augmentation, you're going to lose that bone over time. However, if we have the scaffold in place, the PCL scaffold, which remember is slowly resorbing, it maintains that bone and space. So this gives you now predictability in terms of keeping the bone there. Okay, so this regenerated bone can be sustained through the use of the scaffold. This is very, very important and quite a novel finding. And then we'll also see what that means for the placement of a dental implant. So we can see here where we place a dental implant just with the gel, without the scaffold. The part of the dental implant that was within the regenerated bone is now exposed. Okay, however, in the sample where we have the scaffold, we can keep the bone around the dental implant. This gives, again, the stability to that bone. So it's an approach that's specifically targeted at our clinical problem that we are dealing with. So in summary, what we will be able to achieve here is that we facilitate extraskeletal or vertical bone augmentation, which has dimensional stability, allows the insertion of a dental implant mimicking the clinical situation that then subsequently will allow us to provide the patient with a reconstruction, dental reconstruction on top of this dental implant. So that's one of the challenges that we're faced with in the mouth. The other challenge that we also, and we can potentially, as you can see, address this with our tissue engineering approach. The other challenge, which is even more complicated, is this periodontal disease issue. Now, this is extremely common disease. It affects probably more than 50% of people with over the age of 50. And it results in this quite extensive destruction of the gums, the soft and hard tissues around teeth. And the problem is that even when you treat this disease, you treat the cause, which is bacterial, and you resolve the inflammation caused by bacteria, and so it doesn't progress, you're still left with these quite significant defects around the teeth. Okay, so that's where we are at the moment. We treat the patient, we resolve the inflammation, we stop it from getting worse, but the patient is left with these large defects. We can't regenerate them. So this is where tissue engineering comes in. So it again gives us some opportunities. And what we really want to address in this disease, that's very important, and the reason we can't achieve regeneration at the moment with current techniques is because the tissue is very complex. The soft and hard tissue interfaces here that are very hard to control during the healing process. So what we get is the soft gum receding and filling into the defect, and we don't get the new attachment formation of bone and periodontal ligament, which we need for improved height and function. So we need new approaches, and again, tissue engineering offers us some opportunities. And this is how we used to think about the problem. So the idea was that here you have a tooth, and here you have your gum, and you've lost some of that gum and attachment and due to the periodontal disease, and you would put this engineered scaffold into this defect and achieve regeneration. And we tried that, but it wasn't very successful. And the problem is that we did not think about this with enough sophistication. What we really need to think about is what's called multiphasic scaffolds. So multiphasic scaffolds allow us to control the different parts of the tissues. So this is what we have been working on. And to incorporate into our 3D printing, which is excellent for bone, we also need to think about something that will regenerate the soft tissue. So you have bone on one side, you have the requirement for a ligament inserting into the tooth. So what are you going to use for the ligament? You can't use the same as you use for a bone compartment. And what is particularly useful is the technique of electrospinning. So electrospinning means that you push through a very thin needle, a biomaterial, via an electric current. This allows very thin fibers to be created, which are particularly useful for soft tissue regeneration. So this is how that composite 3D printed electrospun scaffold would look. It would have a bone compartment through 3D printing, like I showed you earlier, and would have a periodontal ligament compartment through electrospinning. And the way this would be functionalized, because we do need to functionalize this because the scaffold itself is fairly inert, is through the use of cell sheets, which are again anatomically and size-wise very suited to periodontal regeneration because the soft tissue is very, very thin. So the cell sheet technology is this idea of sampling a mat of cells intact without breaking the cells down, without using, for example, an enzyme like trypsin to break down the cells. We can actually utilize this technology, which was developed in Japan, which is a thermoresponsive technology where the change in temperature allows us to harvest an intact sheet of the culture plate instead of breaking the cells down. So the cells are much happier and behave much better within this extracellular matrix that they've created. They feel very comfortable in this and they function very well. So we can take these intact sheets and we can then combine them with our scaffolds for periodontal regeneration. So how that would look is we would combine the electrospinning and the 3D printed scaffolds together into this multiphasic scaffold, and then we would use this to pick up our cell sheets. And you can see the cell sheet being wrapped around the periodontal ligament compartment of this scaffold. And we have now tested these in a sheep model. Again, so you can see these periodontal defects around the teeth. So you can see the teeth and the bone. So, and we've implanted these scaffolds with 3 different types of cell sheets because we wanted to know what cell sheet was the most effective. And we found very encouraging results, especially when we utilized periodontal ligament cell sheets and mesenchymal stem cells. Now, the mesenchymal stem cells are particularly important here because it looks like they're an alternative source compared to the native ligament, and they can achieve excellent regeneration. So we can actually see here, through the use of the scaffold, we can regenerate new bone, we can regenerate new cementum on the root surface, and a functional attachment of ligament between the bone and the tooth. So this is really quite novel and has not been achieved with other approaches. Now, I'll spend the last few minutes talking about the second component of this talk, which is again going to be just a few minutes, which is the workflow and design. So it's okay to do all this biology, but how do we take this into translation? So we need to have the right setup to be able to achieve this. So the concept is we would send the patient for a detailed advanced imaging, CT scan. We would then utilize that data to print and electrospin our scaffold and manufacture that. And then we would implant this customized scaffold specifically fitting that particular defect in the patient. To achieve this, there is actually quite a sophisticated workflow that needs to be implemented. And we have published this and we're implementing this now into our laboratory in our clinics. So the first step is to obtain the CT scan and take the correct data from the CT scan. So here is a CT scan with a periodontal defect. The patient, this is a real patient, so this is all obviously accelerated because it actually takes quite a few hours to do this. But essentially what we do is we isolate the relevant defect within the CT scan, and then we export this data to a computer-aided design or a CAD software. And we work with Mimics software from Materialize to then design our scaffold. So you see, we've got the model of our defect, and now we build our scaffold on top of this. So this is specifically designed for that individual patient. And it's very important that you have the capacity to do this if you want to do customized scaffolds. This software is readily available. What is even more complicated, however, is to impart the porosity onto this scaffold. So there's not really a lot of ready-made software for this. So actually, we've been designing our own software that takes that STL file, converts it into what's called a G code language to then allow us to control the porosity around the scaffold and the architecture within that scaffold that's now being built around that tooth. And this is obviously very important because the STL file is fine for making a model. But remember, our scaffold needs to be porous to allow vascularization. That's the second to last step. And then the last step, of course, is the printing itself. And the printing also needs to not only have a medical grade material for the scaffold itself, but also needs to have medical grade material for the support structures. So in complex scaffolds like this, it's actually very important to provide the correct support material for the 3D printing to occur. Otherwise, you will get collapse of the scaffold. So that I hope gives you some idea as to how we might approach this what is quite a complex problem of orofacial regeneration. But I think what we're talking about here is also applicable to other types of regenerative medicine and other types of organs. I've just have this final slide, which I just want to alert people to the sort of things that we really need to be thinking about when we are embarking on these 3D engineering strategies for clinical translation. It can't be just the biomaterial. The biomaterial is very, very important, no doubt, but it's only one part of the puzzle. We need to have a biomaterial that's resorbable, porous, provides appropriate space maintenance. We also have to have the right fabrication facilities and approaches and strategies and the right environment. This needs to be under a regulated GMP, good manufacturing processes, practices, environment. You can make excellent clear scaffolds. And then the surgical technique needs to be correct as well. So we need to use the right surgical techniques and the right functionalizations. And I suspect that might be my warning that my time may be up. So let's start there because with that last thought, I just want to finalize the presentation and acknowledge my various collaborators in Australia and also internationally and our funding bodies. And of course, my research team, without whom obviously this cannot be, this projects cannot be completed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sasso, for your wonderful lecture. for covering various aspects of tissue engineering for alveolar bone regeneration, 3D printing, bone resorption, and dental implants. So we have received many questions from the audience across. However, I'm going to read one question for you. In the context of age-related bone resorption, so how this regenerative approach will be successful in addressing the altered homeostasis?
Not sure I really caught that, but I picked up something about bone regeneration in complex cases. Resorption? Yeah, so the material that we are working with is polycaprolactone, which is quite slowly resorbing, but will resorb over time. The resorption, however, is also tunable, which means that by using the material with different molecular weight and potentially also utilizing composites where you can also combine it with other polymers, you can also accelerate the resorption if that's what your particular application requires.
Thank you. So I have one more question here. What are the practical implementation of additive manufacturing in dental implants?
Yeah, so some people are also using this for 3D printing of metal implants as well. So what I talked about then was more of the bone structure required for the implants to go into. And this is a big problem for us because we don't have good ways to achieve this. And of course, the practical implication is you can make with additive manufacturing 3D printing specific scaffolds for individual defects. Right now, also you can make implants from metal that are actually placed into this bone. So that's an additional application of additive manufacturing of titanium metal implants for the reconstruction within that newly regenerated bone. That's also possible.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for your time and giving us this wonderful lecture. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. You be safe. Be safe. So we'll. Yes, Professor Soma Mukherjee, could you please turn off your camera? Turn on your camera, please.
Yeah, just hold on. Let me just hold on. Oh. Yes, I hope you can see and hear me.
So Soumya Mukherjee, he did his BTech in Instrumentation Engineering in IIT Kharagpur and followed by a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering in Colorado State University and PhD in Biomedical Engineering from University of North Carolina. He was the head of the Center for Research in Nanotechnology and Sciences in IIT Bombay. Also, he was a Dean of Students Affairs in IIT Bombay. So his area of interest are in sensors, instruments for wide deployment in resource-constrained locales for medical and environmental applications, mobile health, security, etc. And Professor Mukherjee has been associated with biosciences and bioinstrumentation, and also he was part of many international symposia and workshops in this area. He has published many articles in international journals, and he has been on the editorial team on various journals. And he has supervised more than 30 doctoral students and 60 master students. So with this, Professor Mukherjee, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Professor Manjunatha. Am I audible?
Yes. Sir, you are audible. Can you kindly switch on your camera, please?
Auntie? Oh, yeah, you want me to switch on my camera? Okay, just 1 second.
We can't see you.
where is that gone now? Sharing. Okay. I'm trying to share my camera. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So.
Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Manjunatha, Professor Rintu Banerjee, and all the organizers for inviting me. It's indeed always a great pleasure to talk in front of IIT Kharagpur, and here in this case talk virtually in IIT Kharagpur. And indeed, this is a very interesting set of webinar talks under Spark. And so what I'm going to talk about is various experiences in the detection of bacteria and viruses, and how we can stretch it beyond this era of COVID-19. Of course, if I look at it, I'll just give my understanding a little bit of the pandemic. Of course, there's loss of life, loss of working days. The big issue is long-term morbidity, job losses, many types of services industry is obliterated, economic losses to society, and the matter that this disease does not know any borders. And actually, a while back, I think Bill Gates or someone was asked, what is your nightmare? And what they said that respiratory disease that has a long incubation period, and which indeed is true of this one. This is a nightmare for that matter because of the long incubation period. It spreads more widely. It has a reasonably high fatality rate. Of course, there are other diseases which have higher fatality rate, but their incubation periods are short. If I would recommend to everyone this book by one lady called Laurie Garrett, which was published in 1994 or around that time, called The Coming Plague, which is still relevant today. And at the end of that, I mean, it's almost like a PhD thesis, a big fat book. What I understand from there, and looking at today's scenario, that we really have to work proactively to prevent pandemics, and we really have to develop methods to quickly identify the disease agents once we know the nature of the disease agent. Sometimes knowing the nature of the disease agent takes some time, but once we know that, our diagnosis systems should be very fast. I work in the area of optical and electrical impedance spectroscopy sort of sensors, and I'll give you some talk about some experiences regarding developing sensors, which are going to be relevant, hopefully, in the coming days. One of the things that we also have to remember that, today I read that in a newspaper that about 950 odd people lost their life to COVID-19 yesterday. Given that the death rate in India is on a normal year is about 27,000 per day, this thing translates pretty high in that sense, the percentage. It was, if you look at the overall percentage of people who died till now, that overall percentage might not be very high, but 900 out of 27,000, that percentage is not that mean. It's about 3-4%. But there are diseases which have much higher death rates also, infectious diseases for that matter, and we really need to take care of those as well. So one of the issues that face us today is antimicrobial resistance. And it is indeed a global threat, and it is caused by overprescribing of antibiotics, incomplete dosage. People will be prescribed antibiotics and they might take a tablet or two and then they feel better, they stop taking it. As a result, the bacteria present in their body develop resistance to all that type of antimicrobials. So they stop becoming effective in the future. There is lack of hospital hygiene, so there is a lot of antibiotics around in the hospital. There are a lot of anti-microbes around in the hospital, and that creates some amount of AMR. In order to produce enough milk or enough meat or whatever, we pump the livestock full of antibiotics, and some of those antibiotics are actually meant more for humans. So we get antibiotics from eating meat or drinking milk, Some of this goes into the crop, soil, water, and so on. It is estimated that it is going to cause 10 million deaths every year in 2050. And that's a pretty large number. And all of this, when these antibiotics are excreted by the livestock or from pharmaceutical waste or from agriculture or from hospital waste or excreta of human beings, they go into the soil and the surface and groundwater. From the soil, when we grow vegetables on that soil, some of the vegetables uptake these antibiotics. And when the water is used for bathing or whatever, that can cause antibiotic resistance. Not in us, but more like in the bacteria that reside within us. And they become more pathogenic as days go by. And the bad part of the story is that not all the wastewater treatment plants are able to completely remove the antibiotics, which are the trace antibiotics which are present in the wastewater influence. And that is something we need to monitor and keep a close look on. Now, there's a question also that there's a lot of, a significant number of times, antibiotics are prescribed unnecessarily and people take them unnecessarily as well. And that happens because when we get an infection, sometimes the clinical presentation is like, it's almost like a virus. Or rather, a viral infection has a presentation like a bacterial infection. And if that leads to a situation where the doctor might prescribe based on the clinical symptoms, but it is a viral infection. The virus does not get affected by the antibiotics, but the bacteria which are there in the body, they slowly develop resistance towards those antibiotics. That is another problem. So one of the things that we need to have is a quick distinguishing between bacterial and viral infections. Bacterial and viral infections. So, of course, bacteria are not susceptible. Sometimes bacteria are susceptible to some antibiotics and not. The typical tests that are done are the Kharagpur diffusion test, which is the most common. There are some other e-tests and rapid egg and so on. All of them, they require a reasonable amount of time or a pretty expensive PCR sort of technique, which has to be used to see whether a particular bacteria, which is causing a disease or an infection, can be treated by a particular antibiotic or not. So that is one part of the story. The other part of the story is, of course, differentiating between the viral and the bacterial infection. What we have seen, we have developed a technique by which, using chitosan silver nanoparticle composite, we can distinguish between bacteria and viruses on a single sensor, and without significant culturing and time, etc. We know that silver nanoparticles have a typical tendency to kill bacteria by disrupting the cell membrane. Chitosan also has some effect like that. So if we subject the sample which has bacteria to this chitosan silver nanoparticle complex, the bacteria will typically lyse. And with the lysis comes a change in the impedance spectrum of the bacteria. On the other hand, viruses are not so much affected by the chitosan silver nanoparticle composite, but this creates a hostile environment for the viruses, so they sort of agglomerate. And the impedance characteristic changes the other way from what you would expect that in a bacterial sample. So we use this. We use this on, if you look at the, sensor over here, it is a very simple sensor, two little silver strips between which polyaniline nanofibers have been laid out, and that is about it. Once we have this, once we subject this to the silver nanoparticle, chitosan silver nanoparticle complex, we can see that the bacteria sort of degenerates, whereas the virus sort of agglomerates. That is not only seen in the TEM images like these, but also as a change in the electrical impedance of the system. And if we look at that with individual bacterial cultures, we see in all of those cases that impedance actually drops. On the case of the viruses, however, the impedance actually goes up. This is a very interesting feature which we can exploit to design systems which can distinguish between bacteria and virus in a solution, or tell us whether it is more of a bacterial infection or a viral infection. So these are pure bacterial and pure viral samples, of course. The top two, the graphs over here. The bottom two of them, they show a mixture of virus and bacteria. And depending on the amount of virus or the amount of relative amounts of bacteria and virus, whether the impedance is going to go positive or the impedance is going to go negative, that changes. This gives us an understanding into how much we can really take this forward. If you look at that slide on the right-hand side, if we take a sample and just use a filter on it with a 0.22 micron, then we can see if there are viruses, the impedance just goes up. So that is interesting because we really do not have to culture anything. We just have to filter it through a system, and then we can detect whether it's a bacterial infection or a viral infection. That can tell doctors what medicine to apply. That can tell them not to apply antibiotics if it is a purely viral infection. Now, so that was about the EIS optical EIS electrical impedance spectroscopy sensors. Now we come to the other platform, which is the bent optical fiber. What we earlier, our first foray into this domain was trying to develop optical fiber based biosensors, and we were using straight optical fibers. And soon we realized that the straight optical fibers do not have the sensitivity we require in case of trying to detect bacteria. Or even bacteria or virus. So we bent the fiber. Bending the fiber changes the depth of penetration of the evanescent waves. It creates higher order modes from lower order modes, thereby changing the power around the core, increasing the power around the core of the fiber, thereby having more of the evanescent wave, higher amount of evanescent wave which interacts with the bacteria or whatever target analyte that I had, and therefore increases sensitivity a lot. To the extent that with a simple 280 nanometer light source and the LED and used on a bent optical fiber, we could go down to detecting 10 CFU per ml of bacteria. And remember, this 10 CFU per ml is without any pre-concentration, without any treatment, and so on. And that, or even down to 1 CFU for that matter, but the 1 CFU data is sometimes just a yes-no variety. But the 10 CFU data has a lot of reproducibility. I do not know whether there is any other simple sensor like this, which can detect this level of bacteria. Now, there is a problem with this sensor is that the 280 nanometer light is very expensive, in a sense LED, because we do not want too much spread, so it was quite expensive, the detector was expensive and all of that. So we actually coated the fiber, the core of the fiber with gold nanoparticles and started looking at that effect. So with the gold nanoparticles, we now have a different phenomena we exploit. We exploit a phenomena called localized surface plasmon resonance. And this localized surface plasmon resonance works in the visible region of 540 nanometers. The evanescent wave that comes out of the core interacts with the gold nanoparticles to create this localized surface plasmon resonance. The extent of the localized surface plasmon resonance, on the other hand, it is determined by the refractive index in the nano environment around the gold nanoparticles. And if a bacteria comes and attaches to these gold nanoparticles, which are in turn attached to the fiber, it changes the local refractive index, and therefore it changes the absorption characteristics at this 540 nanometers. So we have now a sensor which works in a visible region of 540 nanometers, and we can detect again down to about 10 to 20 bacterial cells per mil. Now, how do we translate this into looking at antimicrobial resistance? So what we do is that we take the fiber, we have our, we modify the surface of the fiber with silane, we attach gold nanoparticles to it, we do some glutaraldehyde-based treatment, and then we put bacteria on it. Now, these are test bacteria. These are and once the antibiotic is used, and if this bacteria is susceptible to the antibiotic, it is going to lyse the bacteria, and therefore change the characteristic of interaction of the evanescent wave, change the refractive index characteristics around the gold nanoparticle, thereby giving us a nice optical signal. So here we are actually using the bacteria as a target for the antibiotic and trying to see whether the bacteria is getting killed by the antibiotic or not. If the bacteria does not get killed, of course it remains in the same form, we will not get a change in the optical signal. So this is the general scheme. There is a power supply, the LED and the focusing lens with optical fibers, and this bent part where the cladding has been stripped off is functionalized with bacteria stuck to the surface. And the output goes to a spectrometer. It does not have to be a spectrometer. It can be an optical detector as well. So we tested for in UTI for UTI. UTI is a condition where a quantitative culture of urine yields more than 10⁵ CFU per mil of bacteria. Typically, it is tested with this Kharagpur diffusion test, which takes about 24 to 48 hours. In our case, it requires 2 hours. The bacteria in artificial urine that can be immobilized on gold nanoparticles coated fiber. And now what we want to see is that whether this bacteria is susceptible to the antibiotic that I want to use, let's say. And when we do that, we can see that if there are these beta-lactam bacteria, like P. aerogenes or whatever, they are susceptible. There are non-beta-lactam bacteria which are not susceptible to that to the antibiotic, and therefore, obviously, if I have non-beta-lactam antibiotic, they are not going to work against this sort of a bacteria. If we look at the absorbance characteristic, what we see is that initially when the antibiotic is applied, the optical absorbance rises somewhat due to the antibiotics are binding on the probe, but immediately after that, the bacteria start rising, and we see a significant decrease in the optical absorbance, significant decrease in the light output. That means that there is much higher amount of the optical absorbance changing. These are subjected to 10 micrograms per ml of antibiotics to look at the susceptibility. If you look at the same time, if you look at these things on in a FEG stem, we can see that these bacteria are completely destroyed by the antibiotic, which actually gives rise to this optical change in the probe. Now, we want to also, so now we have a way to test for antibiotic susceptibility of bacteria. Now we also want to test whether some sample, let's say your milk or let's say water, has antibiotics in it. That can be tested by taking the beta-lactamase, which is an enzyme which is secreted by some bacteria to destroy the beta-lactam antibiotics, immobilize the beta-lactamase on the surface of the probe, and when the antibiotics comes and interacts with it, they hydrolyze the antibiotic. The beta-lactamase hydrolyzes the antibiotic. It changes the pH in the local environment. Here the optical probe is coated also with polyaniline, which which is a conducting polymer whose optical properties change with a change in the pH in the local environment, and it changes the absorbance at the 430-450 nanometer optical zone. We could detect sectorism in milk. We took organic milk and spiked it with different concentrations of sectorism, mixin and so on, and we could detect way down to 0.18 nanomolar of antibiotics. We have to adjust the pH to 5.5, and that is where, because that is where it is most effective. We can develop a calibration curve on which on the basis of which we can in future predict or detect how much antibiotic is there in the milk that you might be consuming. And of course, the consuming antibiotics through the milk is not a good thing to happen, because your body bacteria get immune to those antibiotics, leading to antimicrobial resistance. We have also taken these and looked at amount of antibiotics in wastewater. This is since we cannot calibrate on the basis of wastewater. The sectorism calibration was done in tap water, and the same calibration curve was used in a wastewater influent. That means input to a wastewater plant, which carries a lot of antibiotics from human excretion, from animals and all that. And what we found is that we could detect in that wastewater there were 32.4 nanomoles of various types of beta-lactam antibiotics. So, on this basis, I can safely say that using our sensor scheme and using the handheld device that we have developed, we can even detect the SARS-CoV-2 virus by using an antibody against it, which can detect maybe the spike proteins or something. And because if we can detect down to 10 bacteria per mil, I am quite sure that we can detect 1 million viruses per 5 ml or a droplet, a 5 microliter droplet or whatever. So this is the scheme again, power supply LED with optical fiber, and this green part or the exposed core part will need to be coated by the antibodies to the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and when these bind to it, obviously the characteristics near this changes, and once the refractive index characteristic changes, that leads to changes in LSPR or changes in case of polyaniline. It changes the optical absorbance of polyaniline, and we can use any of those phenomena to detect the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And I think that is about it. I would really, I mean, this is the group. This group picture is at the time when I had maximum students in my group, students and project staff. Most of the work that I presented here was done by Kapil Sadani and Pooja Nag. And there are, I mean, of course, Nirmal and other people have laid the background to this work in a significant way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for your wonderful talk. So we have received many questions from the participants. However, I am summarizing one question here. Is this optical and electrical impedance technique could be used for all types of bacteria and viruses, or it has only any specific applications?
For that matter, the optical fiber based platform. Manjunath, if you can just mute it, yeah, that's it. Yeah, the optical fiber based platform is indeed extremely versatile. Depending on the receptor on the surface of the core, we have detected proteins, we have detected heavy metals, we have detected a variety of bacteria, we have detected a variety of bacteriophages, to the extent that we have even detected explosive molecules like TNT. So it all depends on the receptor molecule on the surface of the core in the bent region of the optical fiber. Otherwise, the rest of the instrument remains same.
So there are other questions. Maybe we will connect you directly with the audience so that you may answer some of the questions at the later point in time, not now. And on behalf of the organizing committee, I thank Professor Mukherjee for sparing your time and giving your valuable inputs on detection of bacteria and virus in the era of post-COVID. Thank you, Professor Mukherjee.
Thank you, Professor Manjunath.
Thank you.
And it was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Greetings from IIT Kharagpur to all the participants and the invited speakers. So, the next speaker is Dr. Sushmita Raichaudhary from Apollo Gleneagles, Kolkata. Dr. Sushmita Raichaudhary graduated from Calcutta National Medical College in 1996, after which she went on to do her MD in Respiratory Diseases and Tuberculosis from King George Medical College, Lucknow. Then she went on to UK to earn the MRCP certification in 2007. She holds a European Diploma in Adult Respiratory Medicine, which was awarded to her at the European Respiratory Society Amsterdam in 2011. She is trained in France in interventional bronchoscopy, EBUS and medical thoracoscopy. She has a large number of presentations and publications. She is presently in Apollo, as I said. And above all, she is very actively involved in research with School of Medical Science and Technology. So she is a brilliant clinical researcher, and presently I'm very thankful to her for taking time out, because she is very busy handling all the COVID patients admitted in Apollo. So Dr. Raichaudhary is going to speak on the role of radiology in the diagnosis of COVID-19. You have the platform.
Share screen. Are you able to see what I have here?
Madam, please share your screen.
I have just tried. Just shared it.
No, we are not getting it.
1 second. Now?
No.
Sorry. It is still connecting. Connecting. Permission share. Have you given me the permission? It is just taking a lot of time to connect.
Do you have a good connectivity there?
Yeah, we have very good connectivity actually.
Admit presence.
I'm actually can you share content and then see, yeah?
Yes, share content.
And share content and then share screen.
Madam, once you select share, then it will ask, maybe if you have the PowerPoint presentation already open, you can select that PowerPoint presentation part, so that only that particular application is shared.
All right. Okay. My PowerPoint. Okay. Application, yeah?
Yeah. If you have already the PowerPoint presentation on your desktop, you can select that.
Okay. I'll select that. I have to. Now can you see?
No, not yet, ma'am.
Yeah. So the share button somehow.
No, there is a share tab at the bottom of your screen. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Click onto that.
Can you see
Yes,
that?
now it's coming. Now
It's
coming.
now it's coming?
Yeah, it's coming. You can make it full screen.
Make it full screen, please. Full screen. Yeah.
Is it full screen now?
No, not full screen. Just make it full screen. Click at the bottom right side.
Yeah, on my screen it is full.
Okay, this will do.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. Thank you, IIT Kharagpur. It's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to be speaking. I'm sorry I'm wearing a mask because I'm speaking from hospital. So please bear with me. So I was asked to speak on the role of radiology in the diagnosis of COVID-19. But as you know that I am basically a clinician. So I thought we would just start with, just recapitulating a few things. Wuhan, we all know, wrote the story of a novel virus which has completely plagued the world. And first, on 17th of November 2009, the first case was documented. And in December, about 59 cases presented with fever, dry cough to Intan Hospital, Wuhan. And 41 of them were found to have a virus which was really new and which was then named 2019 novel coronavirus. What they saw was that nearly 32% of the patients that were admitted to ICU, no matter what they did, just did not survive. So that was very new in the course, and the rest of the world was getting affected. What we found out was that the basic reproduction number for this virus is estimated to be 2.2 and 3.3. What does that mean? That each infected individual can infect at least 2 to 3 new people. So that is why it's really, really contagious and spreads very fast. However, what was good news was that the case fatality, when compared to influenza, was very high, but compared to other things, wasn't too much. And it was estimated that about 2 to 3% was the case fatality rate. But then early on, it was suspected that it is likely lower because the number of people diagnosed was less, because it was all targeted diagnosis. What do we know about the virus? You all know way better than I do, and I don't need to dwell on this, that it is WHO classified as a beta coronavirus of group 2B, belonging to subgroup sarbecovirus, and the exact origin and natural reservoir of it is unclear, but bats and pangolins as well, the main zoonotic.
Could you, I'm sorry to interrupt, could you just change the slides also?
I have changed. I'm changing the slides.
We are still on the first one actually.
I don't know what's happening. Actually, is it better now?
Madam, there is a tab on this, you can see on your, there is a slideshow tab. Now the sharing part has gone off, please share it, and there is a slideshow tab in your screen. You can click onto that, then go for the next, like that.
Sir, I don't know where it has now suddenly disappeared.
Can you again share the screen?
Sir, I will do that in a second. One second. I don't know what's happening here. Share screen. Everything is gone.
We are only getting your video.
Now?
No, not yet.
Now?
Yes, it has come.
It has come, you can see now?
Just a minute, it's just loading. Starting now.
Yes?
No, if screen has not yet come, it's only giving a message that it's starting to share the content.
Sir, I don't know, maybe my connection is slow.
It may take seconds. Just a minute, ma'am.
I will stop it again.
No, again it has.
I'm really, I don't know how this happened.
Click onto the share. Yes, it has come, madam. You can see there is a button called slideshow. There is a
slideshow, yeah. I have put it on slideshow.
No. On the same line, yes. You put it slideshow.
Yeah, I put it on slideshow from current.
Yes, from start.
Now?
Anyway, please go ahead. You can just click onto the next one. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So next one is that we all know that the S protein attaching to the host receptor moving two subunits S1 and S2 is where it goes and attaches, and host factors are A symptoms are sputum production, which is not very common, dyspnea and diarrhea. These patients seem to be called happy hypoxics. A lot of them develop significant amount of low oxygen levels but are not breathless. Breathlessness is not a common feature of this disease. And characteristically, it is found to target the lower respiratory tract. Labs-wise, very typically, these patients will present either with a normal count, but very characteristically with lymphopenia seen. Procalcitonin levels are normal, and that confirms that there isn't a viral element, bacterial element to it. And chest X-ray and CT scans, I will talk about in details. Let's talk about chest X-ray. In the early days of presentation, the chest X-ray can be normal, and 18% of them may have normal chest X-ray in mild disease as well. But the common presentations in a full-blown disease are asymmetric, patchy, or diffuse airspace opacities. Okay. Now, importation, and when you look at the X-ray, this is the presentation of a patient. This is one of the initial Chinese patient's X-ray that I have brought. When he first came in, he just had a hint of a peripheral pneumonic patch, which over 48 hours became really evident. And then you can see that the right side and the left side both are involved. But the characteristic thing is that the central part of the lung remains okay, but it is the peripheral parts that show patchy involvement. Okay. Now, this one presented again in 2020 for the same patient. On day 14, they found that suddenly from this X-ray, the patient has gone on to develop widespread pneumonia, whiteout of the lung, if you like, and there's hardly anywhere that you can ventilate. And these are the patients, no matter how much we try ventilating, they will go downhill. This disease is like nothing that I have treated, having worked in the intensive care unit for over 15 years. Chest X-rays, however, they are not diagnostic, but they help in disease follow-up. For example, as I showed you in the previous X-rays and in this X-ray as well, that as time progresses, you can find either worsening or improvement, and it is lesser radiation given to the patient, and it is quite helpful in determining that. Coming to CT chest, this is one of the studies which was extremely important, and correlation of CT chest and RT-PCR testing for 1,014 people was done, consecutive ones, and I've brought the key results, and this is quite important when we talk about CT, because as a clinician as well, I have found that to find if somebody has viral pneumonia in a pandemic situation, which is most likely to be COVID, the most sensitive investigation has been definitely CT scan. So they found that positive rates of RT-PCR and chest CT were 59% versus 88%. So when patient presented early on, their RT-PCR would be negative. But most of 601 of these patients had RT-PCR positive, but 888, a good 200 or more, had CT suspicion of, so you can catch these patients early on applying CT. With RT-PCR as a reference standard, the CT sensitivity was 97%, which is really good. And with serial analysis of serial RT-PCR, they found that CT was still positive, but the overall sensitivity of RT-PCR was only about 60 to 65%. Therefore, they showed that not only did it help in diagnosis, but follow-up scans showed how the resolution of the lung disease was happening too. So initially, when we had a lot of constraints on achieving RT-PCR in hospitals where CT scan was available, it was used indiscriminately for triaging a patient. A patient comes with symptoms, they have slightly low saturation levels. So in a triage area, an early CT would be done. For diagnosing severe acute respiratory illness, it would be done because to look at the severity of the disease. It would be done to see whether there was any other pneumonias associated apart from the viral pattern on the CT. And it would be helped for prognosticating and follow-up, as I just showed you from the paper and the evidence before. Also, CT involvement score, you all would know, and AI, Professor Chaudhary and I have been discussing it a lot of times. AI is extremely a useful thing for us in a pandemic where it can give us a chance of whether it is viral involvement or not. And severity score, basically looking at the 5 lobes of the lungs bilaterally that we have, is less than 5% is score 1, whereas more than 75% involvement is more than 5. So from 0 to 25, the score was there. Higher the score, worse the prognosis, more the lung affection. So CT score definitely helps in prognosticating the patient. Now, what are the features that we see on CT? A, it is bilateral. B, it is peripheral. But early on, in the first 2 days if a patient presents, half of the CTs may be normal. Within the first 5 days, we look at ground glass opacification. And if you like, what is ground glass opacification? If you have a clear glass, if you frost it, the frosted part of the glass is what ground glass appearance looks like. Gradually becomes more confluent, which gives rise to a crazy paving pattern in 5 to 8 days. And sometimes when patients don't know how, when they were infected or how long into the disease they are, the CT pattern can help us decide how long they might have been into the disease. Consolidations usually develop around 9 to 13 days. Fibrotic strands are seen beyond 2 weeks, and resolution, when it occurs around 4 weeks. Some patients with severe disease are left with fibrosis and fibrotic strands for a long time. And we are seeing more and more of those patients in our OPD. This is an epidemic we will be left behind with even after Corona goes. So typical CT pattern of a patient who has presented to the ICU around the 9th day or so will have this kind of bilateral, if you like, pneumonias, consolidations. You can see the black parts are very, very less. Even in the black parts, there is still ground glassing ongoing, which indicates inflammation of the alveoli. So this is how the disease progresses, ground glassing, and that same after 5 days becomes dense consolidation. So from being gray to going more towards less lighter gray to white is what the development looks like on CT. And this is a young female who has initially presented has a little bit of breathlessness, dry cough, and this is the reticular pattern, if you like, peripherally, just here or there. So we are not worried about this one. But here, this is an 81-year-old lady who has presented with a classical crazy paving pattern, as you can see, bilaterally, peripherally, and there is lots of ground glass opacities as well. So this is somebody we would definitely need to admit and treat. So why is CT not used in a triage rather than a chest X-ray? Because most guidelines have said that because RT-PCRs are now easily available, they do not give excess radiation to the patient. There's hardly any justification in overwhelming the system with a CT scanner. And in most places, dedicated CT scanners are not available because you cannot put a non-COVID patient into a COVID CT scanner, because ensuring uniform following of CT protocol and minimizing spread has to be topmost priority for any hospital that runs a CT scanner for diagnosing patients with viral pneumonia. Therefore, it is not justified in triage in most areas, especially in a country like ours. So definitive diagnosis, as I said, nasopharyngeal or oropharyngeal swab is highly specific. Its specific sensitivity can be as low as 60 to 70%. So if there are 100 people who present with symptoms and you know for a fact that they would have COVID, only 60 to 75% would turn out positive. Many reasons for that: lesser viral load. It could be the way the procedure is done, when it is run, etc. And about 35% people will have a false negative report. Also, it takes a lot of times, and false negatives are a problem. We've had this multiple times. Barn door significant bilateral pneumonia patients, 2-3 RT-PCRs are negative. But here, the CT scanner helps because we still treat these patients as COVID unless proved otherwise, because on the 4th or the 5th time, they will turn out positive. So that is where is the fallacy of the RT-PCR alone. So false negatives are a real clinical problem, and tests with high negative predictive value are needed to definitely exclude the disease. This is where chest radiology fills the gap very nicely. It has high sensitivity for lung involvement, and typical patterns in the setting of a pandemic is useful in diagnosis and monitoring during treatment. And RT-PCR takes about 16 to 18 hours to arrive. When the patient comes to you in the hospital unit and is sick, a chest radiography is available immediately, and it helps in determining the severity and need for hospitalization. But if the patient has mild disease, we would send them back and bring them back for RT-PCR rather than do, if their oxygen levels are okay, rather than do scanning. So disclaimer, as I said, it is sensitive but not specific for COVID-19, the CT scan. Logistically, it is challenging and can overwhelm resources. And unless dedicated scanner for COVID is present and proper cleaning and sanitization is done, it can itself become a vector for spread. Therefore, my last slide is this came out in the BMJ only last week. And this is a decision tool which helps for radiological management of patients with suspected COVID-19. So if there is a suspected COVID patient and who has clinical assessment in laboratory, as we discussed, and who has less than 50% fever, but more than 80% lymphopenia, definitely has lymphopenia but no fever, we would still consider him a COVID suspect. If he's stable and has oxygen levels more than 90%, 94%, then we would do a chest X-ray if clinically required. However, if this is seriously ill and has saturations less than 94%, we would definitely do a chest X-ray. So the world authorities do not still recommend CT for everyone. And on chest X-ray, if there is bilateral opacification, then you go for definite or probable COVID-19 pattern, you isolate the patient. If it is uncertain or normal chest X-ray, please remember initially normal, you go and do a CT scan without a contrast. With or without a CT pulmonary angiogram, if the patient has high D-dimer levels, as you all will know, that thrombosis is a very common accompaniment of COVID infection in sick patients and in high-risk patients. If the chest X-ray shows evidence of non-COVID disease and is not seriously ill, you don't isolate the patient and you review them clinico-radiologically. However, in the stable patient, if they have an abnormal chest X-ray and you're still suspecting, you self-isolate the patient, follow them up and do an RT-PCR. If they have a normal X-ray and they do not have any symptoms, you send them home with advice to still self-isolate and come back if they have symptoms. I just try to keep it simple. I really hope, I'm really sorry for all the problems that happened before that. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Rajaldri. It was a very nice presentation, but I would like to tell you now that the presentation is over, that the slides did not change and we were stuck still on the first slide. So we actually could not see any of your images, yet it was a very nice talk. So I would request you, if you could share your slides, because this is an online international conference and we would like to put it on our website so that whoever is interested, because many people are, there are a large number of questions which have come in. We don't have time, I'll probably take one or two, and we would like to email you the questions, and we would love to put up your slides to compensate for the images and beautiful images which I'm sure they would have appreciated, because nobody could actually see what is ground glass opacity. I mean, I know about it, so I could understand. So it will be a shame if they don't see your images. So thank you on that, and I'll just take one or two questions.
Sure.
These are from some students. How do you differentiate a normal pneumonia case from a COVID-19 case? So this is first question.
That's a good question. Usually, when a patient presents to you with a viral pneumonia or a viral infection, they present with short history of symptoms, which is usually about 3 to 5 days. And they have normally viral symptoms, which are like a stuffed nose, sore throat, a dry cough, or a headache, which is typical of atypical pneumonia. Whereas in bacterial pneumonia, most patients will present with high-grade fever, chills, chest pains, etc. So that is symptomatically. Clinically, when you auscultate the patient, when we look at the patient, they hardly have any findings on putting the stethoscope on their chest. Whereas in bacterial pneumonia, you can hear bronchopneumonia, you can hear bronchial breathing, etc., etc. And then finally, it's the radiology that differentiates atypical pneumonia from bacterial pneumonia, because bacterial pneumonia is very low bar. This is spread. The viral pneumonia is spread. As I said, it is peripheral, patchy, and bilaterally affects the lungs, not rather than one lung. In bacterial pneumonia, it is usually one lobe of a lung or more than one lobe of a lung. Rarely both the lungs involved together unless the patient is very sick.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, can lung ultrasound help diagnose COVID-19?
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good question. It doesn't help in diagnosing COVID, but it can. Lung ultrasound is more and more used in patients who are in the intensive care unit, who are sick enough not to be able to transfer them out. But if there is fluid along with pneumonia, it can show patchy pneumonia, it can show fluid, and a lot of these patients develop pneumothorax. Lung ultrasound is an excellent tool to diagnose bedside pneumothorax. We call a lung sliding sign, which goes away, and it's quite useful.
Okay, thank you. I'll be waiting for your slides, which we will put up on our
Absolutely.
website. Thank you once again for taking time out, especially when you are in the hospital. And I'm very sorry for the glitches. Maybe we can have another talk from you later. Thank you.
I really apologize for that. I don't know why it happened, but sorry.
Yeah. Greetings from IIT Kharagpur. Our next invited speaker is Dr. Kianosh Nazarpour, and he is going to speak on the ups and downs of machine learning for prosthetic control. Dr. Nazarpour obtained his graduation and master's degree from Iran and then moved to UK for his PhD degree. Following 6 years of postdoctoral experience, he joined Newcastle University as a lecturer in 2013. Now he is a professor in biomedical engineering there, and soon he will be joining the University of Edinburgh from September 2020 onwards. His research is motivated by the potential of technology to restore function to individuals with limb differences. He leads the Intelligent Sensing Laboratory, has a large number of postdoctorals, PhD students, research associates, and he has a very vast funding from Engineering and Physical Science Research Council UK. His work has received many awards, including UNESCO NetExplo 2018 award for the Hand That Sees project, with the citation as one of the most promising digital innovations with impact on society and business. I invite Dr. Nazarpour to speak on the ups and downs of machine learning in prosthetics control. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and I hope you would be able to see my screen now. So what I'm going to talk about today is, as it was mentioned, the ups and downs of machine learning and prosthetics control, and we are talking specifically about prosthetic devices. So specifically in this talk, I'm going to give you our perspective of how research in this area is going to go ahead in our laboratory post-COVID. But you're not surprised to see that Newcastle University in the north of England was actually shut down for the past 4 months, and therefore we haven't been able to conduct any research in our laboratories. And that, whilst being devastating for the university sector and the student, it provided an opportunity for us to rethink how prosthetics research can go ahead and whether it is possible to shift the paradigm in this area. For those of you who might not be familiar with how prosthetics limb work, here is a very brief overview. If a movement intention is
May just
If the
go for the
movement-
full screen mode, sir.
Sorry?
You can go for the full screen presentation.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that okay now?
Not yet, sir.
And so if the movement intention takes place in the brain, so would it be possible for you to turn off the audio on your side?
Please go ahead, sir. Please go ahead.
Hello. Right. So when the movement intention happens in the brain, it travels down the spinal cord. It manifests itself in the muscles of the stump. We use a decoding mechanism to work out the difference between different patterns of muscle activity, and with that we actuate a prosthetic hand. The hand is embedded with various sensors, and then we send back the feedback to the brain. So this is a very basic illustration in block diagram how prosthetics are controlled. Essentially, in the clinical practice today, the measurements are made in the muscle from the muscles of the stump. We measure the electrical activity, the so-called electromyogram signals. We extract some features and typically low pass and band pass filtering of the data. So we translate these wiggly lines into these smoother illustrations of activity. And then a binary decision making happens. If both of these two muscles are quiet, nothing happens. If one of them is active, the hand closes or the hand opens. And if both muscles are active, the wrist rotates. And then the hand moves. So this has been the clinical standard for the past 50 years or so. So here is a video. I hope you would be able to see the video of the illustration of how these devices work. So this is a view of a patient trying to move the bar with this sort of binary approach. And you can see that the control is very poor, and essentially the grip is not functioning. So for the past 20 years or so, people have been trying to use machine learning to decode these different patterns of activity from various sensors, such that we would be able to enhance the control and restore multifunctional grips. And our laboratory has been also active in this area. So here is an illustration of a recent work that we've done, and it is almost the state of art in prosthetics control in terms of multifunctional level. As you see in the video, so we are recording from several sensors on the arm, but only 2 of them are active at each point. And we are able to very robustly and responsively decode the movement intention in a user. So it seems that this research is being matured to the highest level. However, many of these machine learning algorithms in fact do not translate to beyond control environments. So like in people's home environments. And there are various reasons, underlying reasons, and the most important ones are users changing their behavior, the way that they activate their muscles, and therefore and adapt to the system. And therefore, the machine or the prosthesis would require a huge and very often recalibration, and it doesn't generalize. And that means that the person has to go back to the clinic many times to get these devices kind of fine-tuned. And many people lose interest, and prosthetic abandonment rate would become up to about 50%. And that's a very huge percentage. So COVID has actually put us in a very interesting, as being awful and devastating for a large part of the world, provides an opportunity to rethink the strategy. So we asked the questions: would it be possible to shift the experiments because people cannot come to the university or cannot go to the hospitals anymore, and people who are symptom-free, but then they require prosthesis, do not go these times to hospitals? Would it be possible to come up with systems that that whilst enable better assistive technologies, for instance, we would be able to record the activity of prosthesis use over 7 days in 24 hours. So we are now working on developing these systems towards this general vision that if you have a clinician and if you have a prosthesis user, right at the beginning after the limb loss, the person goes to the clinic several times to get a prosthesis fitted, but then they go very seldom to the clinic or the window of like a couple of years. And it's very likely that they drop the prosthesis. Now, we are working on a kind of a replacement care model as well. So such that the relationship between the clinician and a home user is bidirectional. And we hope that we would be able to maintain the relationship between these two over a longer period, such that the care is delivered better. Towards that, we are developing a virtual coach that is essentially a smart agent within the home environment that helps the user to train the muscles and manage the expectations before the fitting of the device. And after the fitting of the device, it would enable us to update the controller in whatever approach that we would like to take, and also collect the user data so that we would be able to generate the evidence that these devices actually improve the quality of life of the patients. So this virtual coach, for instance, before the prosthesis fitting, we have developed games, myoelectric controlled games, and that can be controlled via a mobile phone app so that people can practice. And we have developed ways to prototype the sockets that people should wear, and it can be done remotely. A simple scanner, we can print these sockets for them, integrated with the electrodes, and then we are now working on calibrating collection of data for remote calibrations and adherence control. So one of the approaches that we have envisaged and we are now developing is a so-called Internet of Things approach. And particularly, we are interested in an Internet of Prosthesis, in which the user is connected to a cloud system and we can monitor then the number of time and the amount of time that prosthesis is used, and it goes to a cloud server and various application and data analysis that we can achieve on our server. For instance, data analysis in terms of the use of the device, the timing of the device, how well the device is used, how many grips that people use, whether they are happy with the quality of control. So basically, connecting again electronically the patients with a clinician, but at a distance. Also, we would be able to store data for long-term use, as well as developing of other applications, for instance, games on the devices. And these data sets and analysis on the net would allow clinicians to be able to monitor the adherence to the device by the prosthesis user. And also on the way back, they would be able to recalibrate the prosthesis and update the firmware of this, such that as the users change their behavior, they would be able to see remotely whether the prosthesis is functioning efficiently or it requires an update. So this was an overview of our research in the area of prosthetics, and specifically with the theme of COVID. And like I said, the emergence of COVID, the pandemic around the world, has pushed us to start thinking differently about how we conduct this research and whether you will be able to exploit the power of internet and connectivity to push our experiments beyond the laboratory and actually in people's home environments. So, like many other medical device technologies, getting the balance between the three key stakeholders remains a key issue. On the one hand, we have the user needs that are in the current way of delivering prosthetic services are typically disregarded when the new technology is developed. So the user needs are considered when at the clinics when already the technology is developed. Also, the academic and industry push is a factor that works on a different time scale than the clinical factor. And this is not exclusive to prosthetics, but it goes across the whole technology sector. And also, regulatory and further clinical consideration is also important. So in order to come up with a new care model, it would be, whether in the prosthetics or in general in terms of the pandemic, it would be unwise to not consider the user needs and clinical regulatory considerations when we are developing and we are preparing ourselves for the next pandemic if we survive this one. So this was the collective effort of my team at Newcastle. So you particularly saw the work of Han Jung-woo and Agamemnon and Corsulis. Finally, a note that, as it was mentioned earlier, as of 1st of September, we're moving to the University of Edinburgh School of Informatics, and we have several postdoctoral and PhD positions open. And we are interested in skill sets in embedded electronics and in Internet of Things, as well as general machine learning and applied machine learning skill sets. So if you're interested in joining our laboratory, please email me for further information. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Just to ask you one or two. So this is a very basic question. What is the difference between prosthetic and prosthesis?
So it's a very interesting question. Prosthesis, to begin with, in English, prosthesis is a word, and prosthetic is a noun, and prosthetic is an adjective. So, but in the common language, prosthetic is used in the same meaning as prosthesis. But in fact, the right way of doing that is that prosthetic devices or a prosthesis.
And could you suggest any application of machine learning for prosthetics in pharmacy?
So not particularly in pharmacy, but machine learning has been used in robotics that have been used in prosthetics, especially when you are working with toxic or unsafe ingredients in the pharmacy. So robotic devices can be programmed with machine learning such that they would be able to combine different quantities of material or ingredients in order to achieve the ultimate outcome. So this is quite a laborious process for a person to be able to do that, and robotics can help very efficiently with that in that front.
That will be all. We'll be mailing the remaining questions. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Our next session will start at 2:30. Yes.
Okay, thank you for the excellent talk, and we break for lunch, and we will be back sharp at 2:30. For all the participants, please be back at 2:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
you.